colleagues, welcome back, and to members of the public and the press. For the benefit of those joining us online, City Council just met in camera in order to receive an update regarding the O-Train Confederation Line LRT Stage 1 legal update. These matters will not be reported out as they relate to the advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege. And during the in-camera session, no votes were taken other than procedural motions and/or directions to staff. So we carry on with items held. Item 12, review of recruitment and hiring process for councillors' assistants. We have a report plus 2 amendments. So the first amendment that I have is by Councillor Kavanagh, seconded by Councillor Leeper. If you'd like to introduce the motion, please, Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you. Is it possible to get it put up on the screen?
Yeah, we can do that. If the Deputy Clerk can arrange that, please. Just hold for a moment. I should take this moment to thank Caitlin and her colleagues here at City Hall. They're doing a great job of keeping us well organized. So there you go. It's on the screen.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. I want to thank my colleague, Councillor Leeper, for working with me on this, and for the clerk's office. The point of this is in terms of staff working for councillors, they need an independent place where they can go. It's a trusted source where they can talk about any issues related to their job. So that was the intent of this. Do you want me to read the whole motion or just the be it resolved? Well,
maybe just be it resolved and explain what it does so members of the public have a better understanding.
Okay. So, as mentioned, it's working with the City Human Resources Officer. This is very similar to what they do at the House of Commons, which I'm very familiar with after 30 years there. Their Human Resources Office also works with assistants for members of Parliament. And there has to be a go-to place for them to talk about anything. So, therefore, be it resolved that Human Resources Services be directed to establish a point of contact within HR programs and planning branch to support councillors' assistants by responding in an independent, impartial, and confidential manner to any inquiries arising from their employment, including but not limited to relevant provincial statutes, bylaws, policies, and procedures involving employment matters as described in this motion. And further resolve that the identified support person be communicated to all councillors' assistants by way of a memo no later than August 2020.
Okay, so, thank you for that. And we have a second motion by Councillor McKenney, seconded by Councillor Eglai. So we'll get both of these on the floor and we'll put it up on the screen. Councillor McKenney, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, this again is in reaction to the report that we have in front of us in terms of councillors' assistants and the resources that they need going forward to ensure that they have a safe workplace, not just during the application and hiring process, but as they come into our offices and become part of our City of Ottawa Council functioning. So therefore, be it resolved that, 1, a third party from the Office of the City Clerk or Human Resources shall be present during all interviews for councillors' assistant positions. 2, all interviews for councillors' assistant positions shall take place in a city facility. 3, the Office of the City Clerk and Human Resources be directed to provide mandatory prevention messaging and information for councillors' assistant applicants on where to seek support and redress before, during, and after the interview process. 4, Human Resources, in consultation with the Women and Gender Equity Specialists and the Council Liaison for Women and Gender Equity, be directed to develop a mandatory workplace sexual violence and harassment prevention campaign for members of council and council assistants, to augment the mandatory gender equity, diversity, and harassment training session described in Recommendation 1F of the staff report. 5, staff be directed to develop and bring forward as part of the 2018 to 2022 midterm governance review an anonymous reporting mechanism for the filing of workplace concerns and complaints by counselor's assistants or job applicants for counselor's assistant positions similar to that in place at OC Transpo. And 6, the Office of the City Clerk and Human Resources be directed to promote an open door culture in a manner similar to the no wrong door concept, ensure counselor staff and or applicants for counselor's assistant positions are supported no matter how they disclose instances of harassment or violence in a manner that ensures privacy, confidentiality, compassion, and support for survivor-led decision-making, as well as awareness of where to seek additional support and how the matter may be addressed through relevant statutory provisions, policies, and procedures.
Okay, thank you very much. So on the amendments or the main report, comments and questions, Councillor Eglai, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. And let me just start off by saying I'm fully supportive of Councillor Kavanagh's motion. The second motion, which Councillor McKenney and I worked on together, because we both came out of the earlier meeting saying to ourselves, the report is a good one, but we need to do more. And as much as employers and maybe even particularly politicians don't like to be told how to go about doing things, I think it's incumbent upon us. We owe it to the people who came forward so bravely and told their stories to make it a safe place to apply for a job at the City of Ottawa and a safe place to work at the City of Ottawa. And so Councillor McKenney and I bounce back and forth drafts, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the able assistance that we got from Rick O'Connor in his role as clerk. He was extremely helpful in putting this together with us, capturing the language that we wanted to have and the ideas that we wanted to put forward. And you know, some of the things are as basic as having a third party in the room, having the interviews on a city site. I dare say if some of those things were in place earlier on, then we may not be in the situation we see ourselves in now and dealing with the problems that we're dealing with now. So I think that these are reasonable proposals. I think that they're practical proposals, and I hope that it will give people who are coming forward to work in councillors' offices the comfort that it is a safe place to apply for a job. It is a safe place to work. And we're going to do everything we can to maintain that feeling of comfort and security for the people in those circumstances. And if, God forbid, something should go off the rails again, hopefully between the motions that Councillor Kavanagh and Leaper are putting forward and this motion that Catherine and I are putting forward, that will offer people avenues of support and redress that don't exist now. So I would just ask all of my colleagues to support both of these motions, because I think they're absolutely necessary steps that we have to take going forward to fix some of the systemic issues that we have at City Hall and that need to be addressed. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Eglai. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was one of the members of council who participated in the review of hiring practices that the independent consultant undertook. And it was my understanding that the outcome of that review was that, with the exception of one office in particular, that our practices were more or less sound, and that there were some recommendations coming forward. So I appreciate the amendments that we have before us, but I do call into question the need for all future interviews to have a member of the city clerks or HR department with us. I'm not sure I understand the necessity nor the reasonableness behind this. And so I'd like to ask either the GM, the treasurer, or the city manager, for all managers in the corporation who provide or conduct interviews, how many of them are required to have a member of the HR team with them in those interviews.
Mr. Mayor, it's Steve Kay here. It's not a common practice to have a third-party objective rater in the interview. Sometimes we do have HR in. There are many of the management positions in particular, we may have an independent party in to assess that. And in some other interviews, we also have an outside person outside the particular specific workplace to be there to bring a level of kind of independence to it, and a third party that isn't biased in any way. But it's not a common practice across the organization. It's left up to the hiring managers to determine the composition of their hiring board and what they feel are the requirements of the board.
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed when I was in the federal government. I always had a second person with me. I always had a female colleague with me to balance out the gender, but it was always good to have at least two on the panel. But no, we never had a member of the federal government's HR team with us. So, you know, I think we are all aware of the need to conduct interviews professionally. The review that we had done recently have come out with some suggestions, and I do appreciate and acknowledge the amendments. I do believe your interview should be at City Hall. But if someone is out of town and the only way to interview is by the phone, I don't want that to preclude me from conducting an interview. I don't want to be handcuffed from interviewing very viable candidates going forward. So I think every attempt should be to hire at City Hall, but it clearly says all interviews shall take place in a city facility. So I don't want to pay to have someone come to Ottawa if I'm hiring someone from out of Ottawa just to have an interview. But again, the wording is important. All interviews for councillor positions should or shall, or every effort should be to take place in a city facility. I agree with that. But again, we have to be careful that there are some people who don't live in Ottawa, or it's just not possible to come in person for an interview. So I think some of these changes are good, but maybe I can just ask Mr. Mayor, to the mover, Councillor McKenney, I can't support item 1. I just want to be clear on that. I don't think that's necessary or required. But number 2, can we say all interviews for councillors, assistant positions, or every effort, start off by saying every effort for all interviews for councillors. We just need to slightly amend that to make it clear that every effort should be undertaken to have the interviews in the city facility, but leave it open for those rare examples where that can't happen or may not be able to happen.
So it's been suggested, Councillor Brongdon, that the clerk may have a comment on that before we ask Councillor McKenney to comment. Mr. Clerk, do you have any advice for us?
Mr. Mayor, under the current circumstances, perhaps just adding the words at the end along the lines of all interviews for councillors' assistants positions shall take place in a city facility or via electronic means.
Does that meet your desire, Councillor Brongdon?
It would, yep.
And Councillor McKenney, is that a friendly amendment?
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor. I think that we know now that we have electronic means that we have at our disposal that we have to realize.
Carried on the motion then, as amended.
Okay, well, I think Councillor Brongdon, are you finished your comments?
I do. I would like the mover to address my concerns with item 1, and that is we really need to think about the logistics of coordinating not just interviews, but now having an HR or a city staffer with us. When I interview 4 to 5 people. I don't think this is required, but I'd like to hear a debate on item 1 in particular. Thank you.
Okay, so I think Councillor McKenney will have a chance to wrap up and she can address your concern at that point because we have other people that like to speak. Councillor Fleury, please, on both amendments and the main report.
Je vais être court, Monsieur le Maire, simplement pour I want to thank the clerk, first of all, for the report. I support the amendments. I think that as a political category of elected officials, we need to improve, and I think the report gives us the opportunity to do that. And the motions put forward will give us the opportunity to do that. There is a specific situation pertaining to one of our colleagues. We have dealt with it, but I do think it's important for the council as a whole to have barriers in place that protect us and our employees. Political roles and responsibilities can weigh heavily, and it's good to have a support system for employees as well as others. So I'm in favor of both these motions. Thank you.
McKenney and Kavanagh, we'll just put you at the end because you'll wrap up on your motion, so we have other people to speak. Councillor Leeper, please.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And I just want to thank Councillor Kavanagh for bringing forward this motion. To FEDCO a week and a half or so ago, one of my assistants actually came to speak to the committee, and I think the motion that Councillor Kavanagh and myself are bringing is going to address something. I just want to quote really briefly from the CBC article that came out of Ms. Mitchell's delegation to us. She said, Mitchell welcomes a recommendation to provide extra training for new councillors on how to recruit and hire, and a move to provide more formal orientation sessions for new staffers. But for her, the most important improvement is making sure political staff who aren't unionized and whose roles and pay vary from councillor to councillor know where to turn when trouble arises. Advice, she says, she never received. It's hard for me as a manager to have that public failing on the front page of the CBC site, but I absolutely want to recognize that as politicians, when we especially first get elected, but even throughout the term, being a manager is kind of the second job we have compared to the work of day-to-day of being a city councillor and dealing with residents. Some professionalization and standardization and best practices for city councillors who are not necessarily elected on their managerial skills seems like a very good idea. And I think the motion that Councillor Kavanagh is bringing to make sure that our assistants know where to turn, because we're not always focused as much as we should be on being good managers is good. It's backup for those assistants so that they don't have to rely on the city councillor to let them know best where to go when they have trouble. Sometimes they cannot turn to us, and I think having a clear point of contact is really important. And I do want to thank my assistant, Ms. Mitchell, for raising this, and I hope that she is encouraged by not just Councillor Kavanagh's motion, but also by Councillor McKenney's and Eagle's. Thank you, Mayor.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak to the item before we go to the two movers for wrap-up comments? Est-ce qu'il y a des autres commentaires, des autres membres?
Are there any other comments from members of the council?
First.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the motion or the amendments by my colleague, Councillor McKenney, and seconded by Egbay. I just want to make a comment about the third party. Not having had this motion in front of me before and, just trying to get my job done, I used another staffer in my office to always be present in the room when I did interviews. And that worked very well because it's another person. I don't know if you consider that a friendly amendment or not. It's just to have another body there so that you have some neutrality. But that's a suggestion. The other thing is, in terms of new councillors who don't have offices, that was actually an issue for me. I didn't have I didn't have access to a city hall office. And I think if we're going to put down about being on city premises, we better make sure that we have a space set aside for incoming counselors to do this, notwithstanding that I really like the idea that we're going to have the electronic option, because I think that's what we're going to be doing a lot of in the future. But I think still there should be some effort if we're doing in-person meetings that that be considered. Could I get some feedback on that? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because you're in that limbo period between the election and the swearing in on December 1st. So, Mr. Clerk, I know when I had the honor of being elected in 2010, staff provided me with temporary office space, which I found very helpful. Is there the capacity to ensure that there is some kind of a room set aside that councillors-elect can use and book for interviews?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we were actually discussing that the other day, and we would be doing that both in the ward and at City Hall. Okay,
thank you. Councillor, back to you.
Okay. Yeah, and I wonder if I can get feedback from Councillor McKenney. Just throwing it out there about having another staff person in the room, if that could be considered to be okay. Well,
thank you for the question. I would prefer it was a staff person of the city. I think that, again, our assistants work for us. We have differently established relationships, perhaps. I wouldn't be wholly opposed to it, but I do think that the best practice would be to have someone who is very neutral from the councillor at that point of hiring, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, fair enough. That's all we had in front of us at that time.
I'll address that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor McKenney, if you could wrap up and then answer Councillor Brockington's inquiry. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, everyone, for considering the motion that Councillor Egli and I put in front of you. I was a councillor's assistant. I've actually had, over the course of my career, exceptional bosses. I've been very lucky. Mr. Kanalakis is one of them, and I've had others, elected officials, who are actually exceptional. But I know, and I know especially with my first job as a councillor's assistant, that it could have made me or broken me. It made me, for better or for worse, because I had really strong, compassionate, understanding bosses who were demanding, who wanted things done, but it was always a fair and safe workplace. So the opposite can happen, and we owe it to assistants to ensure that we are giving them the safest workplace possible, with all the supports that they need to be able to flourish in their career. I believe that councillors' assistants are the most important jobs at City Hall. Take a look at what they do for us. Where would any of us be today, just today, had we not had our assistants answering our emails, answering the phones, taking care of residents, reading these reports, providing us with the background and the information that we need to do our jobs. I strongly and firmly believe that it is. So, why HR? Why does HR have to be in the room? I think that, again, it needs to be somebody who's neutral, who a new recruit, a new applicant can turn to, can ask questions, can ensure that everything they need is in place. I have said time and time again, my skill set is not in management. I hire, I do the best I can, but we need that extra support. This is in reaction to another report that we got this past week on harassment in our workplace. We cannot allow it to happen again. It is incumbent upon us to ensure that people, often women, who come into these positions cannot face sexual harassment in our workplace. We have a tremendous amount of power, and this is how we use it it up. I think that in terms of HR and having someone there, I believe that all we need to do, and I think it would benefit all of us, especially in our first election, but even consecutive elections, to have an HR person appointed to us, maybe one HR for every 5 of us, and we can call on them immediately. We get their names the morning after. Here's who they are. I know that the clerk's department in this city is the most efficient and effective department that we could possibly ask for, and I think that could be easily put into place. And I don't think it's a tremendous thing to ask for to ensure that we are never faced with another place where we have a large number of women who were brought into our workplace and felt and were harassed and mistreated. So I think that these will put what we have in this motion will put all of those supports in place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone else? I don't see anyone else on the list. I see Councillor Luloff with his beautiful baby. I guess you have 1.5 votes today, Councillor, because of your lovely child. So we have 2 amendments. The first by Councillor Kavanagh, seconded by Councillor Leeper. Carried?
Carried.
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 Second is by Councillor McKenney, seconded by Councillor Eglai. Carried?
Carried. Carried.
And on
Dissent on 1.
Sorry?
Dissent on item 1.
Okay, that's Councillor Brockington.
Yes.
Me too, Mr. Mayor.
And Councillor DeRuse. Okay, and on the main report as amended, carried?
Carried. Carried.
Okay,
Carried.
thank you. Next is, get my notes here. Yeah. Ottawa Ward Boundary Review 2020, Options Report, examine les limites de quartier de la ville d'Ottawa pour 2020. We have 2 amendments. The first is by myself, seconded by Councillor Harder. And I'll just read, Councillor Fleury, who is your seconder? I don't have one down here.
Councillor McKenney.
McKenney? Okay. Be it resolved that the Ward Boundary Review Consultant team be requested to develop a 6th option for inclusion in the second round of public consultation developed on the basis of the following criteria. 1, addressing on a priority basis the 3 wards projected to be significantly in excess of the average ward population and outside the acceptable population variance in 2026, namely Barrhaven, Cumberland, and Gloucester South Nepean. Number 2, giving consideration to the 2002 OMB ruling and the 1991 Supreme Court of Canada ruling, which recognized and protected rural and other communities of interest with a view to minimizing, whenever possible, the impact of significant changes to established ward boundaries in communities of interest. 3, addressing the impact of significant changes to established ward boundaries and communities of interest, particularly in the urban areas defined in the options report. And 4, giving consideration to ensuring that geographically proximate and similar communities of interest are located within the same ward. And 5, giving consideration to the June 2019 Council direction seeking to maintain the current number of wards. So on this, thank you, Councillor Harder, for seconding the motion. There's been some discussion today about, well, this is gerrymandering. Well, there's only one person around the table whose boundaries do not change, and that's the mayor. So the notion that there's gerrymandering going on by asking that we consider one more option just defies logic, because of course the boundaries of the City of Ottawa do not change, and mayor and mayoralty candidates run throughout the city. Every other ward is impacted to a large degree or a lesser degree in the report. What I'm asking for is that when this issue first came before us, it was very much an issue to deal with the 3 outliers of the ward system that consistently had a large number of people well above the median or was about to reach that status, as is the case with Councillor Meehan's ward, where lots of people want to move there and lots of housing going up. So this is an opportunity to deal with what the real root of the problem is, because I have not heard from other people saying, well, I like my boundaries to change, but we have heard certainly that it's unfair that you have one ward that is significantly larger than the others, and that has an impact on workload, et cetera. So let's, at the very least, I ask for your support to go out and put this as an option for discussion. What's wrong with having another option, a sixth option, that would have minimal disruption on the whole ward system? I think if you looked at some of the wards, there are some cases, many of the options would be a detriment to the urban core, because if there's going to be extra seats, which I don't support, they're going to be in the growth areas of the city, which is generally outside the Greenbelt, in Barrhaven and so on. So we have three outliers. They're Gloucester South Nepean, they're Barrhaven, and the Cumberland ward. And my suggestion is that we ask our consultants to do the number crunching and the boundary adjustments on very much a minimal basis. Otherwise, we have this ripple effect or this domino effect that has huge implications and takes wards and divides, one street is one ward and another street is another ward. It just doesn't make any sense. So the other point is that I very much do not support adding more seats, and some of the options have us adding one or two more seats. Well, if we were to do that, we'd have a bigger city council than the City of Toronto. And I don't really want to give the provincial government a reason to come in, as they did with Toronto, and reduce us even more. So I think keeping the same number of seats, adjusting on a minimalist approach makes the most sense. So Councillor Fleury, if you'd like to introduce your motion, please.
Merci, Monsieur Mayor. This is an element that I spoke to at committee, so I'll just read the motion as is. Whereas acknowledging that the Ottawa ward boundary have remained essentially the same since the ward boundary review in 2005, which created 23 wards. Whereas on June 14, 2019, the city reached a population of 1 million residents, representing a considerable growth since 2001, according to census data. Whereas population is only one of several factors to be considered in the shifting of these ward boundaries. The impact of volume of work also has a significant impact on representation. And whereas the boundaries have not been comprehensively reviewed in 15 years, and whereas we need to strive for more equal representation throughout the city, whereas the Ottawa Ward Boundary Review 2020 overall goal is to achieve effective representation, which includes voter parity, natural physical boundaries, geographic communities of interest, minority interest, ward history, and capacity to represent geographic size and shape of ward and population growth. Whereas voters do not always live, work, and consume products and services in the ward in which they reside, and whereas residents contact city councillors where the issue arises and not necessarily based on the ward of their residency, whereas transient populations can create larger caseloads for wards where the workforce and the business districts are located, and whereas this review aims to balance to achieve effective representation, therefore be it resolved that the consultant add an additional component to evaluate how the locations of businesses and employment areas impact the council's workload beyond ward residency, and that within the additional component, consultants review yearly Service Ottawa call logs to accurately assess council's workload, therefore ability to represent, and therefore be it resolved that the consultants be required to look at other municipalities and cities' similar data sets for the ability to properly include business owners and workforce population in this review.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. So we have two motions to speak on the main report or the amendments. Let's see who we have here. Councillor Moffat, please.
Thank you very much. Some of you may recall that I did not support a direction from Council a year ago regarding capping the number or advising the consultant that we wanted to keep the number at 23. I think the vote was 22-1 at that time. My position has not changed. The motion in front of Council is largely the same as was the motion in June of 2019. But I want to add some context to that. And just looking at the history, the similarities between 2005 and today in terms of the ward boundary review, these are not things that get unanimous support. These are often things that do have two opposite sides. Going back to 2005, the Corporate Services Economic Development Committee, which was the FEDCO of the day, approved the boundary review with the two new wards added, 6-3. Certain things stayed the same, the status quo between River Ward and Gloucester Southgate. There was a motion to remain status quo on Beacon Hill Cedarville, on Innis Ward, Gloucester Southgate, Alta Vista, meaning those four wards haven't actually changed since amalgamation. There was a shift in a neighborhood from Somerset's Capital Ward, some small movements, some small things that council does have the right to be able to make those changes at the end. There was some other things, some other suggestions. The one that suggested at the time was that rural Cumberland works really well with urban Orleans. Well, time has shown that that's not actually the case, which is why we need to do a review. We want to fix that issue. There was a suggestion that instead of putting Goulburn with Stittsville or with Rideau, that you put it actually with Nepean to create just a Goulburn-Nepean ward to address those issues, but not create too big of a ward. Of course, that ward would be too small in terms of population, which is the issue with Cumberland today. Interestingly enough, and Councillor Hughley will find this fascinating, the original report in 2005 recommended the ward boundary for Stittsville be Terry Park. That was moved after consultation over to the Carp River. Now, Councillor Cullen later on came in and tried to move the ward boundary for Stittsville all the way to Castle Frank. Of course, that was voted down by council later on in June of 2005. The public support was same as it is now. There's public support for a decrease in the number of councillors, public support for status quo, public support to increase it. But what the consultants of the day found was that there were no actual, because the issues then, not dissimilar from today, just reversed. It was Canada and it was Barrhaven. We had to fix the issue in Canada, we had to fix the issue in Barrhaven. Today we have to fix Orleans and Barrhaven. What the consultants found, trying to keep at 21, there was no viable option to fix Canada and Barrhaven without going off of 21. As Pierre Paget put it at the time, the clerk of the day, there was no real way you could do this without major restructuring of all 21 wards, which means you couldn't stay at 21 and fix your problems. Similar to what we have today. You can't stick at 23 and fix the problems. The reason why there was so much concern at committee last week was with options 3 and 4, which are built from the June 2019 decision of council to stick with 23. You can't actually fix the problems that you want to fix without creating new problems. And the new problems create consternation on council. When it came to council, a couple months later, the vote was 14-8. And it's funny how issues like this make strange bedfellows. The 8 votes against it were Doug Thompson, Glenn Brooks, Raymond Blois, Peter Hume, Michelle Belmer, Clive Doucette, Georges Bedard, and Jacques Legendre. You wouldn't necessarily put those 4 in the same category, but that's the way these things work. The motion to keep 21 wards failed. The motion to make that adjustment in Stittsville failed. The motion to gerrymander wards 8 and 9 failed as well. You can only do so much. We hire a consultant to do the job of doing the ward boundary review that's required. We should have done this in 2015. We didn't. It's here before us today. Let them do their job. We don't need to provide them with more work to do. They've already done this work. They've already checked to see if we can do 23 wards and stay at status quo for most of the wards. We can't. It's not possible. Asking them to do a 6th option is just asking them to do work they've already done. It's not our job to provide them with more work. It's our job to just move on with the process, go out to consultation on round 2, make any necessary adjustments as we can, as we will when we come forward with the final report from the consultant in December of this year. Thank you. May the force be with you.
Thank you. Councillor Eglai, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm on the same page as Councillor Moffat. I'm not going to give a history lesson on it, but we came up with a mandate. We hired experts to fulfill that mandate. They've come back with something that not everybody likes, so we're trying to give them a different mandate. There's a second round of consultation coming up. If out of that second round of consultation, they hear from the public a variation on a theme, and they come back and say, you know what, we've decided to add another one, another two, number three options for you to look at, I'm fine with that. But I fundamentally do not believe that it is our job to determine the areas that we are going to represent going forward. That's the whole idea of hiring an independent third party to do this work. And so I believe that, you know, possibly Scott and I will be outliers here today, but I'll proudly wear that because, again, fundamentally, I don't think it's our job to meddle with the direction that we have provided to them because we don't necessarily like the results they brought back. They're experts. It's what they do. We've given them direction. They've done some consultation, possibly not as much as is optimal because of COVID, but they have a plan going forward for the second round, which will take that into account and hopefully broaden the number of people that they can bring out. And again, if the result of that is they come back and say, you know what, we've got a couple of different ideas. We've tweaked the ones we have and we've added one or two onto the plate for you to look at. I'm fine of looking at that, but let them bring it to us. I firmly believe it is not our job to bring it to them. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Question to Tim Mark. Is there any problem with council asking the consultant to consider another option? Is there any impediment to that being done?
No, Mr. Mayor, in my opinion, there is not an impediment to putting a sixth option or requesting the consultants to bring forward a sixth option.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you, Mayor. Keith and Scott, you won't be outliers. I'm going to also dissent on both of these motions. One of the things that I think is fundamental to the way our democracy works is that in Canada, we don't have that political interference with where the boundaries are. We develop neutral mechanisms to do that. There is no criteria listed in either of the two motions that doesn't fall within the criteria that the consultants have looked at. In that big puts and takes exercise that they have done, the capacity to represent population, geographic features, it is all part of their calculus. And these are 5 options that they've come up with us to go to consultation without making a recommendation that have already been considered. There's no need to go back and ask them to prioritize any one of those criteria. It is a complicated balance that they have to achieve. I'm not thrilled with many of the options that are in front of us. As my colleagues are tired of hearing me say now, splitting Hintonburg in 2 is a non-starter for me. There are issues with all of the options that are on the table, but I'm meeting with my community associations, I think, this week. We're going to start putting together the evidence. We're going to start putting together the information we need to try to get council to, on an evidence-based basis, come up with some tweaks, which we heard at FEDCO is within bounds. We should go to consultation with the neutrally developed options that are in front of us, hear the feedback, develop our arguments as to why these are not the best balance of the criteria that are in front of the consultants, and then we can debate those when it comes time to actually achieve a new ward boundary system. But to come in at this point with what I think is a politically motivated reason to want to do something different is wrong. Let the consultants do the work for us. We'll consult on their recommendations, and we will argue for the changes at the appropriate time. So I'm very pleased to go out with the options that are there, even though I don't like most of them. But now is not the time to go for different options that politicians are asking for.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Menard, please.
Thanks very much, Mayor. My concern with this is that we shouldn't be directing this. And the issue is that we could end up being challenged and end up in a situation where we lose control of the item, and this ends up back in the province's hands, out of our hands, to make this decision. And so, the professional consultants have put forward 5 options. I'm not thrilled with all of them. I think that there's some to be desired there. And the mayor's spoken negatively about some of those as well. But we already know what that preference is. It's a preference that has not been suggested by our professional consultants. And so if people don't like the boundaries suggested, that's what the consultation is for. That's why we're doing the consultation, is communities can say, this is a concern of ours, we're splitting up here, we need to tweak this piece. That's similar to what the clerk has also told us at committee, is that we need to be careful about gerrymandering, and this comes close to that. And so for that reason, I'm going to be voting against both of them.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McKenney, please.
Thank you. I will also be voting against the Watson Harder motion. I think that, again, I also, when we look through the options that were put in front of us, there were probably some issues with every one for each of us, but I think we have to be careful here. It's not about us. It's not about us as elected officials. It's not about us in terms of, what is the best and easiest way to a re-election. What is the ward that we like? It's what is the ward that works for the ward boundaries, that work for the entire city. So not just our ward, who we represent today, not just us as elected officials and, what that path is to re-election. We have to be very, very careful about that. Yes, we need at least one, possibly two new suburban wards, but that cannot come if we add the wards that are being suggested in this motion and keeping the same number of wards. Where do they come from? So if you're inside the Greenbelt, you have to know they're coming from inside the Greenbelt. So any councillor right now who represents any part inside the Greenbelt has to know that this is coming at your expense, at the expense of your residents. And there's no reason for it. We went out, we have options in front of us. It's not that when we come back that those options, that they can't be amended in some ways, that, if there are communities of interest that we see them pulled apart, that we can't work to ensure that we are making the best decision possible. But to go out today and say, you know what, just because we're going to put out this additional option, and if it's chosen, it's going to have serious, serious ramifications on this city. So again, I would like really implore you to think about what this means for the city. Not what this means for you and I, not what this means for our wards and our boundaries, but what this means for true representation in our city. And yes, we have all acknowledged that Barrhaven has got far too many people out. Orleans is growing at a great rate, absolutely. But we cannot, in order to solve that, hollow out inside the Greenbelt. We have to do this in a manner that has been thoroughly thought out by experts that we went out and hired. Whether we agree with all 5 options or not is not the relevant point today. We now have to go out with those 5 options that we ask experts to give us and come back and have that discussion, not to throw in a 6th one that did not come from expert advice. Thank you.
Councillor Luloff, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that it's really rich that we are saying that we're looking at, 5 options here. If you look at the way that the East End is divided in each of these options, I'm really looking at 2 options: to accept option 1 through 4 or to accept option 5. So there are no options for me in the East End. This report doesn't take into consideration the fact that we need to have proper rural representation in the city of Ottawa, and these options are cutting out a rural ward, which is not fair to our rural residents, and it also bifurcates and makes it very difficult. I know Tim Tierney loves that word. Makes it very difficult to have more bilingual voices on council. Right now, the way that it's set up is fine, other than the fact that we need to ensure that we reunite communities in the East End. particularly Queenswood Heights and Fallingbrook. And the options that are being presented would cut in half down the hill, would remove Orleans Wood from Convent Glen, which is one single community association. So to say that we have, 5 options to consider in front of us is very disingenuous. I absolutely support the mayor's motion here. I would like to see an actual third option to consider. Because right now, in the East End, we have options 1 through 4, because it doesn't change for us, or reducing council to 17. And as all of my colleagues know, the caseload that we currently carry is high enough. The province has already indicated that it doesn't particularly care how we go about this. So let's ensure that we have real options, I don't want to see another councillor cut out of my BIA. I want to ensure that we've got, boundaries that make sense because of the population that we have. So let's preserve the amount of bilingual or francophone seats that we have on council and tinker around the margins when it comes to the rest of the wards. Our problem exists in Barrhaven. Let's solve that problem without causing too much disruption to everybody else. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor, for your motion. I would be very upset if we were moving amendments to withdraw options from public consultation. There are some options there that I will never support, but we should go out and consult on them, make them part of what's being offered to ensure that the public reacts to that. I will never support going to 17 wards. And I thought about, well, do we really want to put the public through a 3-month consultation with 17 wards if I already know that it's not going to be part of it? No, it should be part of the bundle. But we also said that was driving this ward boundary review was Barrhaven. And we wanted to address the challenges in the southern end of the city. And we want to mitigate as much the ripple effects that the review can have on other wards. And I've been through multiple reviews as a community association president, as a school board trustee, now as a councillor. And the number one thing that people care about is their community, is their neighborhood, that we don't destroy the synergies that exist within communities or neighborhoods and the years that have taken to help build up the links between perhaps neighboring communities. They really like being in particular wards. And I expect that there will be tweaks to wards. Even in the best case scenario, we should be looking at some changes to wards. Maybe certain communities or sections, someone on the other side of the street should be in the other ward. That all makes sense. And I'm sure we raised that with the consultants in our discussions. I certainly did. But there are some options here that really hurt multiple communities across the city, and I do not want to support those types of options. So the motion that we have before us from the mayor and Councillor Harder says, hey, focus on the problem and mitigate as best as possible you can the ripple effects in other wards. I think that option should be there, and I'm saying that because of what I've heard over the years from the public. I've not done extensive consultation yet on what we have before us. But I can predict some of the main themes of concern that will come out of the public consultation will be the need to keep communities and neighborhoods together. And I think that adding a 6th option, if we know that's going to be a concern, let's add that option now as part of the bundle that we're going out for consultation on. So I will be supporting the amendment by the mayor and Councillor Harder. To Councillor Fleury's amendment, perhaps he can have an opportunity for a wrap-up, but I mean, we could argue that we have an increased workload for different types of segments of the population, whether you have rural or urban, younger or older, if you have social economic mix that's a greater diversity than others. You could argue that certain segments by their very nature, create a greater workload. And I think that's very hard to measure. I know population alone, it should not be the only factor we use to determine workload. But I need a little bit more information about exactly, Councillor Fleury, what you're trying to get at and why you think your motion is beneficial for us to approve today. So on the Watson-Harder motion or amendment, I will be supportive of that today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Just to follow up on a point to Mr. Mark, does asking the consulting team to add an option create a significant future risk on appeal? My understanding is that removing an option as opposed to adding one would be a significant risk.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I concur with that. Removing an option, the consultants said at Finance and Economic Development Committee that all of the 5 options implemented effective representation. So removing one of them, in my opinion, would create a risk. But putting a 6th option out, particularly before it's for the more involved round of consultation, in my opinion, does not create a risk in front of the tribunal, should there be it.
Okay, thank you, and you have a good track record there. Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of points, if I could. I agree with what I heard from a lot of my colleagues today. I want to say up front, I'm supporting your motion, and I'm going to explain why. I had a lot of concerns with what I saw at FEDCO. I saw what they wanted to do in my own area, didn't meet any of the criteria that we gave them to follow. The plan is to move a big chunk of land that has no population in it, so it doesn't help us balance any the ward or any of the things it's supposed to do. It takes away the natural boundary, and every one of the criteria we gave them, it goes against that. And people say, well, okay, but how does that impact the residents? Well, for example, we have 7 ice surfaces in my ward. It takes 6 of those ice surfaces and moves them into another ward. What does that mean? Well, that means for Canada women's or men's hockey or any of the sports that use those surfaces, they're now a lower priority when it comes to booking those surfaces, because the way we've structured our Parks and Rec, the teams and the associations within that ward get priority on the recreational facilities in the ward. So there is an impact on the residents. As Councillor Moffat had outlined, there was quite a reaction in this area back in 2005 when the ward was done. And people came forward and they said, no, we want to stay within Canada. Our kids go to school here. Our families are interconnected. Often there's multi-generational families within our community. And they wanted to try to keep that together, and they wanted us to try to do that with the boundary. So while any impact on me personally as a councillor, it's not going to affect the number of people that can vote for or against in the next election, because there's no population change here. But it's going to have a very negative impact on people in my ward. Any changes it has for me, there's ways we can address that. But I can't help the hockey teams, for example, get moved up the priority list if we were to adopt what the consultants are suggesting. So I'm going to support that. The other piece of it was, when I asked at FEDCO for a rationale as to why they wanted to do that, there was no rationale provided. So how do I go out, as some of the councillors suggest, we can now go out and consult on these options. How do I go consult on that option when I can't tell people why they want to do that to them? And so with the lack of information in there, I think the best thing, and I really appreciate the answers that we've gotten from Mr. Mark today, but I really do believe that the only way I can go forward with this process is if we do pass the Watson-Harder motion. So I want to thank you for bringing that forward, and that's all I want to say on this for now, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dudas, please.
Mr. Mayor, there's absolutely no problem with having a 6th option. Like, I don't know why we think we have that much influence over residents in respect to this. They're going to come back with their own opinions. This will go to public consultation. One of the things they likely would have said from the get-go is, why are we not looking at an option that considers the status quo with some tweaking around the edges? We're just adding another option. We're taking nothing away. There's no process that's being circumvented. We're just giving another option, which is democracy at its best. So I'm hearing all of this. A week ago at FEDCO, every single person, with the exception of one councillor, spoke about the issues that they saw and the negative impacts that the options as they stand were going to have on their ward. We all have very grave concerns with this process, but it's not going to be up to us. We can let the public decide. There's nothing wrong with the 6th option. I fully support this, and I think that we'll let the public decide at the end of the day. And what's the matter with having a choice, really? Like, this is ridiculous.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Kavanagh, please.
Thank you. I have a question. Who's drawing up this option? Who's going to make the maps, et cetera? Are we asking the independent consultant to do that?
That's correct.
So we're putting that out to them, and we don't know what it's going to look like exactly. We're still putting it out to the...
Well, no, the whole purpose of this motion is to give them direction to come back with an option that they would go out for public consultation on.
But they're drawing it up.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely, not us.
Okay. Well, I think that the issue I see here is, having dealt with federal boundaries for many years, I went through a few processes because I was a staffer who attended Procedure and House Affairs Committee for many, many years. And the big thing that's different here is that we can vary the number of seats. When you're in federal, it's okay, you're going to have X number of seats coming in the next election, and that's it. This idea that we're saying, well, what if we look at the 17 and to vary it so much is obviously makes it really problematic and creates a lot of possibilities. And that's probably why it's so difficult. I have some concern. I'm concerned why we're putting this out at the last minute without notice of motion, because I think that one of the things that I expected was to get more notice on something this major, that we were taking these very seriously. But if this was something important, I would have expected us to have had it given notice so that we could hear about it and think about it more. So that was one of my concerns. For Councillor Fleury's, I think there's so many options in terms of what changes workload. I think that's a really difficult thing to try and calculate. I don't know if the independent consultants can do that. I could make an argument about the caseload of seniors. It's pretty high. They have a lot of time. They're at home and they call us. How do I differentiate that from what your concerns are? I think we all have, but numbers are a good way to do it, and we want to make the numbers as even as possible. We want to have as close as we can. So anyway, thank you. I can't support either of these at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor DeRose, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and we've been talking about that for a long, many times. But I just have a couple points I'd like to make, and I'm not going to repeat the whole thing. But I will absolutely support your motion, because for people in Cumberland and Osgood Ward, they didn't have many options, like Councillor Rudolph mentioned. With the option that we presented with the 5 option, there is no option. There's only 2 options, really. So I'm really happy to see there will be another option. There is a couple of facts on that. That also the consultant couldn't even provide us how many households we have in each riding and how they are dividing that. So there is a lots of stuff in the report we're missing. We also what also is missing is the disappointing that when you look at the numbers of the residents, how they are splitting them or making the ward, you lose representation in one ward, which is rural. You're going to lose one rural ward. Right now, in fact, it's not about us. It's not. I absolutely agree with Councillor Moffat, but Councillor Moffat is not impacted. He'll actually lose 1,500 residents, and he'll lose a couple hundred kilometers of road from his workload, which is fine. It's not. This is rural areas, and we all work together collectively on it. But Cumberland and Osgood Ward will have 2,200 kilometers of road. That's really, if you put it in perspective, is literally from Ottawa to Winnipeg. And double that, you'll have a 4,000 ditch. And this is all going to come to one community. And also the report mentioned that they are doing this for balance. That's really imbalance because they're looking at the community from francophone perspective. They're mixing demographic and dynamic and different community, mixing them up together. So I will absolutely support yours because honestly, the resident of Cumberland and the Osgood will not have any other two options. I'm happy to see this motion. So I'll be obviously supporting your motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Menard, I think you've already spoken on this item.
Yes, I just have an amendment.
Sorry?
I just have an amendment.
Okay, go ahead. What is it?
It's to remove point 5 in your motion.
Sorry, where, which item is it on point, when you say point 5?
Mayor, could we have a motion on the screen? I apologize.
Sorry, we haven't received a motion, and who's your seconder?
So it's to remove point 5. I'm hoping Councillor Brockington will second it.
Sorry, it's the item 5, giving consideration to the June council direction seeking to maintain the current number of wards. You want to remove that? Well, that's not friendly from my perspective.
Yeah, I figured it wouldn't be. But this gives the options, gives the flexibility to the consultants to come up with an option that could work if this is going to be passed. I'm still going to be voting against this motion, but this would give an option for that to actually work.
All right, well, do you have a seconder?
I will second.
Who's that? Councillor Brockington? Okay, so we'll deal with that when we come to the amendments. So the next speaker, I believe, was Councillor El-Shantiri. If I'm not mistaken, Councillor El-Shantiri, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I will be supporting your motion. And for Council been around since the last boundary review, and I have to congratulate the team we have today. They did a great job at the time, and it was a welcoming news from our rural residents who mostly asked to keep the rural together. That doesn't mean we cannot represent suburban or urban, but that was the discussion took place in 2005. So they did a brilliant job. We saw the expansion of my ward at the time and Councillor Moffat, and we didn't have a lot of the difficulty to be there and represent those folks. I'm going to support your motion, Mr. Mayor, just because to give the public another option. Because at the end of the day, and we heard from my colleague, Councillor Dudas, it's almost like we're voting for ourselves. It's about us. It's not about us. It's about the community and about the residents. So I believe an extra option, we challenge ourselves to do more, and hopefully the community at the end of the day, they will come out and with a clear direction to us like they did in 2005. In 2005, we didn't have a credible challenge when the decision was made or the recommendation was on the table. So with that, I'm going to support your motion. And I find it ironically earlier, most of my colleagues, they're challenging our staff and other items, they're challenging the consultant to do more and to come up with other options. And now we say, oh, no, we don't want to see another option. I don't see what harm is it to see another option on the table. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gower, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we have the consultants here who could answer one question. My question is, you know all of the factors that go into this ward boundary review better than any of us around the table because you've studied it for a few months. In the mayor's motion with these 5 criteria, how likely is it that you can address all of these problems that have been described here, do you think you could actually redraw a new option 6 that would be able to satisfy the requirements that this motion is asking you to do?
Can you, Mr. Mayor?
Yes,
Can
go
you
ahead.
hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
Just identify yourself, please.
Oh, this is Gary Davidson on the consultant team. For you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gower, we have just received, within the last 24 hours, this motion. And we'll, if the council instructs us to, we will develop a sixth option, and we'll try our best to look at all of the points, but they're all challenging. So there's a lot of work to do. It'll take a bit of time, but there's no question that we will, if instructed, we will have a sixth option available by the start of the second round. Thank you.
And either the consultants or the clerk, how different are these 5 conditions in this motion from the original direction that council gave the clerk to go out and do this review?
Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Mayor, I would defer to your expert consultants in this matter.
How different are they? This is Gary Davidson again. There's a great deal of similarity amongst them. We're trying to still achieve effective representation. And as you know, the council did give direction in its, when it set out the process to look at options that retained the current number of wards. And of course, 2 of the options presented did that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you. That's a good point you raised, Councillor Gower. Councillor Fleury, to wrap up on yours.
Monsieur le Maire, c'est pas mal clair. Je vais retirer ma motion.
I'm going to withdraw my motion. I think I made the point. My main purpose was to highlight the fact that if the analysis was based on a population-related criteria, then we didn't need to pursue that. So I will support your 5 criteria, the 5 criteria in your motion, and I will withdraw my own motion.
Maybe I misunderstood. Are you withdrawing your motion? Councillor
That's right.
Le conseiller Fleury, you're withdrawing your motion.
Unless someone else would like to speak who hasn't spoken already on this item? Okay. I guess a couple of myths that we should bust here. This notion that this is all, hands off, we're not going to be involved in it, we've got to be above the fray, is complete nonsense because we're voting on it right now, members of council. So the notion that we can't have any influence on this has been disputed by our city solicitor, Mr. Mark. We're adding an option to go out for public consultation. I don't know what people are afraid of not having an option that is more of a minimalist option that would allow the public to offer some comment. The notion by some members of council that this is going to be detrimental to urban representation, the reality is the options that are before us, the 5 options, any of them adding new seats are seats in the suburbs outside the Greenbelt. So it further weakens the downtown urban core. When you add 2 more seats, those 2 seats are not coming from the urban core because the growth, as we all know, is in the East End, in the South End, and in the West End. Third point is, what's wrong with going and asking the public their opinion on a 6th option? We've been told that there's nothing wrong or inappropriate by adding a 6th option. The consultant said that they can deal with it. Most of the points in my recommendations are in fact I think reasonable, in line with what they've been doing, the good work that they have been doing. So and then, it's withdrawn now, but we had one member of council supporting the Fleury motion, which was doing exactly what she was opposed to, directing the consultants to once again add criteria to their study. So I'm not quite sure the difference between going and asking them to do something like that on the one hand and then asking them to do what I'm suggesting. And as I said, at the end of the day, there's no skin off my nose because the boundaries for the city do not change. But I can tell you, lots of brave comments today about let's have this independent process. I can tell you when these results come back and there are massive changes to the wards, there's going to be a fair number of people wondering what have we got ourselves into. So I would urge you, this is the process that we have to face, but I really don't support the amendment or the suggestion by Councillor Menard that we reverse our council decision to maintain the same number of wards. Maybe I'm living in different neighborhoods, but I have never had anyone in my 20+ years in political life ask me to add more politicians. And the mess that we have in the federal system that Councillor Kavanagh knows very well is that every 10 years we add politicians. So within the next, I suspect, 3 changes or 3 cycles, there'll not be enough seats in the House of Commons to have everyone in. Whereas you look at the American system, not that I'm a big fan of what's going on there right now, but their system is capped. It's always 100 senators and it's always 400 and whatever members of the House of Representatives, and they alter the boundaries. Granted, there's lots of gerrymandering down there, but they alter the boundaries so that it never increases the number of politicians. So Councillor Menard has a motion. We'll vote on that first because that has an impact on my motion. So his motion basically is removing criteria 5, which I'd urge you not to do. I don't think we need more politicians in the City of Ottawa. So yeas and nays on the Menard motion.
Mayor, is it possible to read what that criteria 5 is?
Well, it's right up on the thing. Be it resolved that motion be amended, that delete it. That is, the wording is giving consideration to the June 2019 council direction seeking to maintain the current number of wards. So did everyone get that? And the motion is by Councillor Menard, seconded by Councillor Brongton, to remove that item from item 5, which I would disagree with. It sort of defeats the purpose of the rest of my motion. So yeas and nays, please, on the Menard motion. Deputy Clerk.
Councillor Moffat.
Sure.
Councillor Luloff.
No.
Councillor Harder.
No.
Councillor Kavanagh.
Yes.
Councillor Suds.
No.
Councillor Deroux.
No.
Conseil Cloutier.
No.
Councillor Leeper.
Yes.
Councillor Tierney.
No.
Councillor El Shantiri.
No.
Councillor Gower.
Yes.
Councillor Eglai.
No.
Councillor Shirelli. Councillor McKenney. Councillor McKenney.
Yes.
Councillor Menard.
Yes.
Councillor Meehan.
No.
Conseil Fleury.
No.
Councillor Brockington.
Yes.
Councillor King.
Yes.
Councillor Hubley.
No.
Councillor Deans. Councillor Dudas.
No.
Mayor Watson.
No.
I have 8 yeas, 13 nays.
Okay, so now on to the main motion. Carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Yeas and nays.
Yeas and nays have been called. Okay, on Watson Harder.
Councillor Moffat.
No.
Councillor Luloff.
Oui.
Councillor Harder.
Yes.
Councillor Kavanagh.
Yes.
Councillor Suds. Councillor Deroux.
Yes.
Conseil Cloutier.
Oui.
Councillor Leeper.
No.
Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor El Shantiri.
Yes.
Councillor Gower.
No.
Councillor Eglai.
No.
Councillor Shirelli. Councillor McKenney.
No.
Councillor Menard.
No.
Councillor Meehan.
Yes.
Conseil Fleury.
No.
Councillor Brockington.
Yes.
Councillor King.
No.
Councillor Hubley.
Yes.
Councillor Deans. Councillor Dudas.
Yes.
Mayor Watson.
Yes.
13 yeas, 8 nays.
Thank you. Item 14 is National Capital Commission's Building Lebreton redevelopment, status update and principles of engagement. Councillor McKenney has
Point of order, Mayor.
Oh, sorry. The item is amended in the last one. Carried?
Carried.
Carried as amended.
Carried as amended, correct. Sorry. Thank you, Eli. Sorry, did someone have a point of order? So, Councillor McKenney, would you like to introduce your...
It was me.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Harder.
It was me saying that we had not voted that.
Oh, okay. I apologize. So, Councillor McKenney has a motion seconded by Councillor Leeper with respect to community benefits, I believe. Councillor McKenney, would you like to introduce your motion, please? Councillor McKenney? Push the mute button.
Yeah. Where's the Lebreton Flats? Do you want me to read it out, or do you just want me to introduce it? I think people can see it on the screen.
Yeah, maybe introduce and just... Yeah, just give an opening as to what it's trying to accomplish and then what the be it resolved is. Go ahead.
Yeah, so, Lebreton Flats is being redeveloped, as we know. We have a report in front of us by the National Capital Commission. It is an area where we lost working class community at one time that was expropriated and moved out of the area. It's an opportunity to rebuild a community that meets the needs of everyone, a truly integrated community and a truly mixed income community that has all of the community amenities that will make it a highly, highly successful neighborhood. So this motion is simply to ask the National Capital Commission to look at the feasibility of long-term community benefit agreement to work with the community to put that in place as it is building out. So therefore be it resolved that Council direct the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development to establish an interdepartmental working group involving PIED, RCFS, and CSS to prioritize the community benefits the city requires from the development of a new community that are within the city's purview under the Planning Act in consultation with the ward councillor, and also direct the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development as part of the consideration of the Planning Act application for an amendment to the secondary plan to report on how the city's priorities have been secured, and request that the Mayor to advise the Capital Commission that the city would like A, commitments on recreational and social infrastructure to support the new community, commitments on local employment generation opportunities through future land use, conditions on agreements with development proponents, and any work directly procured by the NCC, and C, consideration of other matters that stakeholders have identified may be best covered by a community benefits agreement or comparable arrangements to give the comfort to the community that community benefits will be a priority of the project. And 4, request the Mayor to communicate with local federal ministers and MPs the need to provide the NCC the necessary means to realize a successful city building project, including infrastructure funding support, credit facilities, or other matters that may arise in the implementation of the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Carried.
Just before we get to that, I just let people know that this issue was raised by the NCC, and their president, Mr. Nussbaum, has indicated that they have not, they've rejected a community benefits agreement. So I'm happy to support this motion and give it the good college try, but they've opted for an advisory committee, as I understand it, and not a community benefits agreement. So that's where they stand. Hopefully they might be able to change their mind.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, if I could just respond to that very quickly. I know that they asked the Community Benefits Coalition that's been set up, it's over 25 organizations in the city, to sit on an advisory committee, but they have not ruled out a community benefits agreement. It's part of perhaps a process that will get us there.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm just repeating what Mr. Nussbaum said, that they're not accepting that, but there's no harm in us asking again. So on the motion, carried? Carried, thank you. All right, our next item. Oh, I'm sorry, we do have, I'd ask Councillor Dudas and seconded by Councillor El-Shantiri, be it resolved that Ottawa City Council approve that the meeting time be extended past 7 p.m. pursuant to subsection 8(1)(c) of the procedure bylaw 2019-8. Carried?
Carried.
Carried. No yeas and nays?
No.
Yeah, so on Lebreton, carried as amended.
We need more time on this.
Carried.
Carried
Carried as amended.
Okay, next, let me just get to our next item here. So zoning bylaw amendment 1 and 9 Canfield Road and 13, 15 and 17 Parkmount Crescent, modification de règlement de zonage 1 et 9 chemin Canfield et 13, 15 et 17 Croissant Park Mount. Councillor Egli, not Eli, Eli Egli. This is your church issue, so the floor is yours.
Well, I wouldn't characterize it as my church issue exactly. It's a community concern, Mr. Mayor. I'll try and keep this brief because again we're approaching 7 o'clock. But it would be an understatement, at the least, to say that this file, where it is right now with an approval from Planning Committee, it certainly has not turned out the way that my community wanted it to be. But let me be clear, my community has never been against an expansion of the footprint of the church. They've made that clear from the beginning. What they have wanted is they've wanted to be able to work with the church board in order to come up with a plan that didn't sacrifice 3 perfectly good residential homes on a nice, quiet residential street. And I want to take this opportunity to thank my community for the efforts they put in this regard. They made some very succinct, professional, respectful presentations to Planning Committee the other week, and I was very proud of the work that they put into it and how they came together as a community. So what's at risk if this application is approved today, as I said, is 3 perfectly good homes are going to be taken out of a residential neighborhood, and the street that they sit on is going to be effectively gutted. So the people who bought into the area with the expectation that they would be living in a residential community on a residential street suddenly are going to be faced with a chunk of that street being zoned institutional and a parking lot sitting there 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year that will likely be used about 1 or 2 days a week. And what's particularly galling to the community is it is surrounded by parking options, private parking options, including 2 vacant lots that are owned by the church within easy walking distance, and an office building with both above ground and below ground parking that the applicant admitted during the Planning Committee meeting that they had not even approached to talk about alternative arrangements. Planning tools in this case are somewhat imperfect because we don't have the ability to force a landowner to park off-site. At least you can't do that in my part of the city, though I understand it may be possible in certain other parts, but certainly can't do it in my part of the city. And so my community is faced with seeing parking all around them, empty parking all around them on weekends, and at the same time having to accept that this is approved, having an empty parking lot sitting on their street at least 5 days a week, maybe 6, and again, removing that community feel that they have on that street, the character of that street, by turning it into an institutional use. Now, my wish is, and my hope is, and my community's wish and hope is that this decision gets reversed. But if you don't see it that way, if that's not how you can go, I just want to say that the folks in the community will shift, and it will shift from stopping the parking lot to doing everything they possibly can to shield that parking lot through the site plan process. And in that regard, I will likely be lifting delegated authority on site plan to make sure that the wishes and the concerns of the community are protected as best as they possibly can be. But again, my hope is that you'll understand that there should be a way to fix this. There should be a way to work with the community to come up with a solution that doesn't require the sacrificing of perfectly good homes. It doesn't make sense. And as I say, the planning tools are somewhat imperfect in this regard. But again, the community would be giving up something significant. The people that live there would be giving up something significant in their lives. And again, please keep in mind that their position has always been we are not against the expansion of the church. We just want to do it in a collaborative, community-minded, cooperative way that allows us to continue to have our community and in conjunction with the church community. And they've coexisted now for about 25 years. So it can be done if there's a will. But the first step would be that the application would have to be denied today and people would have to go back to the drawing board. And my community is certainly prepared to do that. They have those discussions to roll their sleeves up and to try and find a solution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Mayor. Councillor Eglay knows the local character best and the concerns of his community. I just want to say at Planning Committee, I voted against this item. It is replacing residential land with parking, and that is not the direction in which this city should be going. Residential land is at a premium. We all recognize that when we went through the urban boundary expansion debate. We recognize the difficulty of achieving our intensification goals if we're trying to do it through infill, and replacing residential land for the long term with parking is completely counter to that. And I hope colleagues will just think about the message that we're sending to residents if we move ahead with approval of this development. The church and community center are going to be positive additions to the community, obviously, but the addition of parking in what is otherwise an uninterrupted fabric of residential development is, it just seems to me, wholly inappropriate. Thanks, Mayor.
Wholly inappropriate. We caught that.
Oh!
Okay, Councillor El-Shantiri, please.
Well, that's a tough act to follow, Mr. Mayor, but I just want you to know I did attend the Planning Committee, and I applaud my colleague on Planning Committee. They listened a few hours, or more than a few hours, actually. And I find it ironically when we talk about the church in the community for such a long time. And I was really happy to hear one of the residents who's opposing this application. He sent his kids to the preschooling of the church. So obviously, it's more than a church. It is part of the community, and community is made up of neighborhood and churches. That's what makes our community. So, Mr. Mayor, I will be supporting staff's report. Staff work very hard trying to bridge between the community and the applicant, and they try very hard. This has been going on for a long time, and I think Councillor Harder, I hope she will speak a little bit about the history of this file. And to suggest there's an empty parking around on the weekend, I hope one day some of you will go to the church and you see the age who attend churches. I lost 2 churches in my community, traditional churches in West Carleton in the last 10 years. And I can assure you, the resident who's attending the church, they cannot walk the 100 meter and cross in Greenbank, which is speed on it on a good day is in the 100. Ask them to cross with a walker or a cane in the middle of the winter storm. So, Mr. Mayor, I will be supporting staff with staff's report, staff's recommendation, and I hope my colleague will do so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak to the item? So on the staff report, carried?
Carried.
Dissent by Leaper and Aglai and Fleury. Caroline.
Dissent.
I think we better do yeas and nays.
Yeas and nays, Mr. Mayor.
All right, so yeas and nays on supporting the staff recommendation or not.
Councillor Moffat.
Yes.
Councillor Luloff.
Yes.
Councillor Harder.
Yes.
Councillor Kavanagh.
No.
Councillor Suds.
Yes.
Councillor Derouse.
Yes.
Councillor Cloutier.
Oui.
Councillor Leaper.
No.
Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor El Shantiri.
Yes.
Councillor Gower.
Yes.
Councillor Eglai.
No.
Councillor Shirelli. Councillor McKenney.
No.
Councillor Menard.
No.
Councillor Meehan.
No.
Councillor Fleury.
No.
Councillor Brockington.
No.
Councillor King.
No.
Councillor Hubley.
Councillor Hubley.
Sorry, yes.
Councillor Deans. Councillor Dudas.
Yes.
Mayor Watson.
Yes.
12 yeas, 9 nays.
Okay, thank you. Our next item is on the bulk consent agenda. Councillor Menard, you wanted to speak to zoning bylaw amendment 24, 26, 28, and 30 Pretoria Avenue, modification de règlement de zonage 24, 26, 28 et 30 Avenue Pretoria.
Yes, thanks very much, Mayor, and I'll try to keep my comments short, and I have a direction at the end. We've worked with the developer on this. We were able to achieve several important changes to the proposal in the site that's coming in the site plan, also, preserving trees, contribution to the Ward 17 Affordable Housing Fund, the preservation of some of the zoning. We've worked collaboratively. But this application is another example of a broader trend that residents are getting tired of, and it's the private planning of our city by developers outside of our own rules. And that's what we're looking for here is an update to our zoning. So we need intensification at this site and many others, and I'm supporting that. And residents are calling for and supporting intensification at this site as well. But our zoning needs to be updated. It needs to be a public process that reviews and implements changes. Our city's engaging in these processes now, and it's my hope that the corresponding updates to the zoning will generally be adhered to so we can move away from the zoning changes that stem from site-specific desires. This is why we're getting all the battles at council all the time, is because we have outdated zoning bylaws and there's not consistency. And so we could really change that. I know other councillors agree with that. And so in this case, what happened with this site is that there was actually leftover zoning that wasn't meant to be there. And this developer, though this person is a good person to work with, they were able to utilize that leftover zoning that should have been changed years back but wasn't, to push through this development. saying why we need a zoning update, I couldn't think of a better example. And so to this end, I do have a direction which I know staff are prepared to take, and it's that requesting that staff present to council information that outlines an estimated timeline and the public engagement process for the comprehensive update to zoning that is anticipated to follow the adoption of the new official plan. And further, I'm requesting that staff outline some of their expectations regarding the outcomes of this zoning update, including whether staff believe this update will see a decline in staff recommendations for zoning amendments sought by developers, and some more consistency in our decisions.
Staff, Mr. Willis, are you comfortable with that direction?
Mr. Mayor, the direction builds on a direction already given by the Planning Committee to bring a report forward this fall, and Councillor Menard's motion asks us to add additional commentary to the report that we're bringing, and I'm comfortable to address those requests.
Okay, so council's agreed on the direction. Agreed, Councillor. And on the motion, committee recommendation, carried? Carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Councillor Dudas and Councillor El Shantiri, motion to adopt reports.
The report from the Integrity Commissioner entitled Report to Council on an Inquiry Respecting the Conduct of Councillor Shirley. The report from Ottawa Public Health and the Emergency and Protective Services Department entitled Temporary Mandatory Mask Bylaw for Enclosed Public Spaces in the City of Ottawa. And the report from the Finance Services Department entitled Public-Private Partnership, Ottawa Community Ice Partners. Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee Report 14, Community and Protective Services Committee Report 11, Finance and Economic Development Committee Report 15, Planning Committee Reports 26 and 27, and the reports from the City Clerk entitled Ward 19 Cumberland Vacancy Options, July 15th, and the summary of oral and written public submissions for items subject to the Planning Act explanation requirements at a City Council meeting of June 24th, 2020 be received and adopted as amended.
Motion carried. Okay, so we have, I guess, close to 13 or 14 different motions before us. We'll go with the ones that have been given notice first, moved by Councillor Fleury, seconded by myself. Councillor Fleury, do you want to introduce the motion with respect to cannabis store locations?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was read at last council and was part of the procedural memo, so if you're okay, I'll just read it. Therefore, be it resolved.
Yeah, that's great.
Therefore, be resolved that council direct the mayor on behalf of City Council to write to the Honourable Rod Phillips, Minister of Finance of Ontario, Honourable Doug Downey, Attorney General of Ontario, requesting the Ministry modify the regulations governing the establishment of cannabis retail storage to instruct the Alcohol and Gaming Corporation to consider over-concentration as an evaluation criteria and provide added weight to the comments of the municipality concerning matters in the public interest when considering the application of new stores.
Councillor Leeper.
Thank you, Mayor. We're seeing not as many cannabis store applications as in the market. Obviously, I think there are 5 in Kitchissippi. One of the mitigations against over-clustering of cannabis stores in our ward is that while the Super-Ed at the corner of Wellington and Warren has been the site of a lot of problematic traffic, that is going to start to diminish. There are stores that are likely going to go in on Carling and on Merivale that are going to be much more attractive options for people who are coming in from Canada and from Barrhaven. And I'm asking residents to be patient with the current crop of applications in that the market is going to sort out some level for the number of stores. And my point always is, we don't regulate the number of barber shops in Wellington Village, or a third of our storefronts would probably be vacant at this point. I just want to know whether the intent of the motion that's in front of us is to ask the province to be more mindful of the specific criteria that we passed when council opted into cannabis retailing, or are we going further? Is the intention to get the province to pay more attention to even stricter clustering considerations?
Mr. Mayor, I think the question might be don't know if you're hearing me, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor.
I think it's probably a question that's best answered by Mr. Willis, but if I can preface that the city has built principles that it's writing in those submissions into the AGCO, and the AGCO blatantly told us that those don't matter. So we're asking for those to have teeth.
So the consideration I have is that they're not principles, they're fairly well-defined criteria that are a pass-fail. Are you closer than 150 meters to a park? Are you closer than 150 meters to another licensed cannabis retailer? And I just want to make sure that we're not going further than the criteria to which most of us agreed into saying, you know what, there are too many. It doesn't even matter if there's 175 meters between them. We don't want any more in this neighborhood? Or are we asking the province to pay stricter attention to the actual pass-fail criteria that we've already established?
Mr. Mayor, if I may, with Councillor Poirier's indulgence, answer this question for Councillor Leeper. The motion is very carefully written. The province has sole authority for setting the criteria that AGCO follow. AGCO follow those criteria set by the province, and right now the province has effectively put a carte blanche out there for most matters, with the exception of very few. Council had taken a previous position. I would say the province hasn't. Province set their own opinion and has guided the AGCO directly. Our concern is not to pick winners and losers in terms of businesses. Our concern is not to pick any particular community. Our concern is that if in any community we see a high concentration of cannabis stores coming in because of AGCO, they will push out other uses. They will push out other uses because of the rents that they command, and especially as we come out of this COVID-induced recession, we are very concerned about the diversity of uses on our main streets. So the motion is very narrowly written, not to try to suggest to the province what the criteria should be, other than asking the province to add the concentration as a factor that AGCO considers when they're making their decision, hoping that the province would understand Council's concern and give further direction in that regard. So I think we've tried to be restrained in what we're asking the province, hoping that that's what will get us what we were hoping to achieve.
So, Mr. Willis, the concern that I have is that overconcentration is very subjective. When we opted into the cannabis retailing framework, we said that we didn't want clusters where stores are closer to each other than 150 meters. I'm afraid of getting into a situation where I'm being asked to make subjective decisions as to whether or not there's an overconcentration, because for some residents, having 2 cannabis stores in the ward is too much. And others are willing to see a lot more and let the market sort it out. So my concern with Councillor Furry's motion is that if we're talking about principles and subjectively defined overconcentration, that, as a councillor, I'm going to be caught in the middle trying to make these very subjective decisions. I am more than happy if the city continues to object to stores that are closer to each other than 150 meters, and I would absolutely, since I voted in favor of that, like to see the province give that greater weight in its own decision making. But I am afraid of going down a path of being asked by residents to decide what overconcentration means. I like the numerical basis that we have currently in our cannabis framework.
Okay, Councillor Meehan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, you know what I think about pot, right? Little joke. Getting punchy here. I don't think that most of the communities around the city will have much issue in the number of cannabis outlets that are established. But I do think that for the councillor for Vanier, Matthew Fleury, that it is an issue. I have friends who live in the market, and they comment on it. Oh my God, another cannabis store is going up, and I think that I think it is a legitimate concern. Yes, these are legitimate retail outlets. They're licensed, they're everything. But it does, in my humble opinion, it does tell the community what it's about. And I don't know that the market area really wants to be stigmatized again as, having the most pot shops. Is it not a possibility that maybe in certain areas we can consider limiting the number? It doesn't have to be citywide, does it? Maybe that's my naivete, but the market needs, I think, sometimes special consideration. That's it for me.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fleury, do you wish to wrap up?
Very quickly.
And I'm happy that council did bring, I guess Jeff calls it yeas or nays, like that in principle, that council advances. It was interesting to note that the HCO was not considering those, so the motion really pushes that at the political level. Under their act currently does not give the authority.
You got cut off a little bit there. You finished? Councillor?
I am, yeah.
Okay. Well,
I'll just propose a friendly amendment.
Councillor Leeper, what is your friendly amendment? Or what is your amendment? We'll see if it's friendly.
Yeah, so the amendment would be that, and sorry, I'm just trying to find provide added weight to the comments of municipality concerning matters. So I'm trying to find the concentration. What is council? There is sorry, could you put that motion back on screen? What I might like to do is, may I ask Mr. Willis just to propose where we could more carefully craft that over concentration means closer than 150 meters.
Mr. Mayor, may I suggest to council to facilitate Councillor Leeper's friendly amendment that after the words consider over concentration, we include brackets such as a separation distance of 150 meters and bracket, and then as an evaluation criteria.
So Councillor Fleury, are you okay with that? Okay.
Friendly.
Councillor Leeper, you're okay with that?
Thank you, yes.
Yeah, just as the second of the motion, I just want to support Councillor Fleury on this because, this is going to happen in other neighborhoods. I was in the Glebe the other day having lunch, and someone came and said there are going to be two cannabis stores almost kitty-corner to one another on Bank Street or just off Bank Street. So I think it's a legitimate concern, just as we had concerns with payday loans and the number of them, the proximity to economically challenged areas. I would urge members to support this because it may be happening in some of the urban wards now, but it's going to start spreading out because obviously these businesses see this as a very profitable business and it's a legal business, but I think we have to take into account the concerns of the surrounding community. We also, you recall, during this whole debate, we wanted to make sure there was a proper distance between schools and cannabis shops. I think most people thought that was reasonable. So I think this is a reasonable motion put forward by the councillor who's obviously, receiving feedback from constituents about the saturation or the oversaturation. So we have a friendly amendment, and on the motion as amended, carried. Adopté. Next motion is by Councillor Harder, seconded by Councillor El Shantiri with respect to part lot control bylaw. Councillor Harder, only you can explain what this is all about.
Well, I do it a few times a year whenever anyone wants to go on holidays. As it so happens, people still want to buy homes and close on them. So it just gives permission to our director of planning, in this case, Doug James, to take on that responsibility. And of course, he would be looking to receive the concurrence of the ward councillor. It's not a lot. It's usually a few, but it's always a few. And this just gives people the right to move in.
Carried.
Okay, on the motion, carried. Thank you. Next is a motion by Councillor Dudas, seconded by Councillor Luloff. Please, Councillor Dudas, if you'd like to explain the motion.
If I could have it put up on the screen. It's basically in regards to just extending the existing community improvement plan to a longer period of time, which will allow us to develop a new one. This is already in place, and it's just to extend the lifespan of it.
Okay. Any questions by members of council? Councillor Luloff?
Essentially, we have the opportunity, along with the economic corridor study, to ensure that we are providing financial incentives to economic development in Orléans. I would encourage my colleagues to support this. This is an area that requires more employment, and therefore, as an interim measure, to improve the Orleans CIP, we would like to have it formally extended. So thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? I don't have the list here in front of me, so anyone else like to speak on this? Carried?
Carried.
Carried?
Carried.
Okay. Thank you, Fran. Thank you. Next.
I'm in favor of this, I think. I'm just wondering about the cost of it.
Mr. Willis, maybe you can explain how the CIP program works, because it...
Not unless you want me to.
Mr. Mayor, like several of our CIP programs, this is a deferral of the, in a return. Treasurer can assist me on the mechanics of this. But what happens is when a property is eligible for this program because it increases its tax value as tax assessment as a result of renovation or restoration or improvement, council would otherwise not get that tax increase if the property was not developed. So it's a deferral of a proportion of the tax increase over a period of time, and it's a sliding scale downward over time. So initially, they don't pay the full tax increase hit. It drops over time. So each property, it varies a little bit, and it depends entirely on the uptake of the program and the number of people who actually.
Sorry, someone's phone is...
Ask Mr. Willis if he would like to do some sort of community improvement program.
Or we could just vote on it and put up the next motion. How about that?
Sorry, I apologize that we got cut off just for a moment. So on the motion by Councillor Dudas and Luloff.
Carried.
Carried.
Third time.
Sorry, what was that, George?
I'm just saying it's carried for the third time.
Okay. Next is a motion by myself, seconded by Councillor Eglai, that we ask the provincial and federal governments to remove the 13% harmonized sales tax for mass. We talked a little bit about the cost of mass, so this will bring the cost down if the provincial government agrees, and that it requests myself to write to the federal and provincial governments. Carried?
Carried.
Next, Councillor Menard, do you want to introduce your motion, seconded by Councillor Leeper?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This has to do with staff within the Transportation Services Department developing and implementing a plan, Act of Ottawa, for the rest of this summer for cost-effective implementation of greater active transportation network activities, expanded road space for active transportation, and safety-enhancing measures which reduce speed, recognizing the needs for residents during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the reason why this is so important is that we've actually seen accidents that have happened with catastrophic injuries thus far in areas that would have been on this exact network. The motion is leaving it to staff to decide on which cost-effective corridors are currently not connected in the city, and to come back with us. And I do have a question of staff, and I'll have a couple more comments. And the question to staff is how many days would this take to develop a plan of this sort?
Mr. Manconi?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. To do the missing links, as I understand it, it's not a question of time, it'd be a question of money. So there's substantial gaps in the system that would need to be addressed, but it depends on the scope and the scale. And also some of the comments that I put in my memo that I issued yesterday are relevant in this context.
And so how many days or weeks are you looking at to turn this around in terms of a plan?
We all know, including yourselves, know the missing gaps. I mean, you know your wards, you know the cycling network, you know the MUPs, you know the sidewalks and so forth. It depends where you want to go with this direction in terms of how comprehensive you want it to be. Again, you know, we look to councillors to identify where the issues are. We've done that in previous motions. We continue to do that. You know, we've closed down the Bank Street lanes for you in that regard. And so to us, this is more of the same in terms of working with board councillors.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I've heard it's just a few days to turn this sort of thing around. Let me just give a few more just introductory comments as well. The Board of Health has unanimously passed a motion supporting the City of Ottawa in increasing the amount of safe active transportation space outdoors for residents to improve their physical and mental health, while still adhering to all guidelines around physical distancing. The city traffic services have reported that traffic volumes have decreased. Though we've seen some uptick, it's still not nearly what it was before COVID-19. The apps that I've seen, it's still less than 50% volumes.
Actually, Councillor, we're up at 80%. We have 7 monitoring stations. We're at 80%. Yeah, downtown in the core, there's some parts that are around 60 to 70. Cycling is down, save and except one of the MUPs near Councillor Leeper's ward. But traffic is at 80%. You're correct, it was very, very low at the beginning of COVID. We're at 40%. But through those 7, if you aggregate them up, it's about 80% and 60 to 70 in the core.
Okay, I mean, that's still very low, and potentially for, you know, the opportunity we have in front of us. The city also has a goal of doing this. That's why I was surprised to see the memo yesterday in the city's 2013 Transportation Master Plan. This is what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be implementing these types of policies. Instead, we're saying traffic volume has increased a bit, so we're not going to do it. That seems counterintuitive to me against our own plans that we've approved in this city. You know, FCM just released a report on called the Urban Project, outlining the need for municipalities to develop the transportation plans tailored to the recovery from COVID-19 and develop a resilient transportation system in the future. All cities across the world are taking this type of action, and we've only had it in little pockets because we've been restricted in doing it. But this is the opportunity to start to look at low-cost temporary traffic measures that we can do this. The city has a number of pylons available. We have our own pylons, and we can be setting these things up in areas where it makes sense to do that. This would go back to staff. They would have the ability to come back with recommendations to it. It's not me telling you that in Orleans these 2 connectivity areas are going to be done. It's staff coming back and saying, here's the suggested areas, because you know, they know best where within our TNP we've got those objectives. And so we've got to encourage residents to maintain their physical and mental health. This is the type of thing that planning, infrastructure, economic development has talked about in terms of building blocks for a healthy Ottawa. They've emphasized this in terms of active transportation infrastructure and mental and physical well-being. This is the sort of thing that, you know, at a low cost, we can be, I guess, getting a lot of benefit for residents overall. And so I'll leave it there on the introduction, Mayor, and I'll have more wrap up, I'm sure.
So, Councillor, I'm ruling this out of order because we dealt with this 2 months ago. Motion 33-7, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Dudas, set out this plan and had a costing center to deal with it. And we also heard very clearly from Mr. Manconi yesterday with his memo that staff do not support this. We have a plan in place, and we dealt with it just 2 months ago. So this item is out of order. Point of order, Councillor Menard, what's your point of order?
Point of order is that your motion spoke to a 2/3 of businesses in those corridors. I'm not talking about those corridors. I'm not talking about that. I respect. I respect the that you've already laid out on the 2/3 to do that. Yeah. That's not what I'm speaking to.
Councillor, the ruling is not debatable, so I appreciate your passion for this.
I'll challenge the chair, I guess.
Okay, so the chair has been challenged by who? Councillor Fleury?
That was me, Mayor.
Councillor Leeper?
Councillor Leeper.
Okay, so in order to, shall the chair be sustained? If you support myself in the ruling, you would vote yes, and if you support Councillor Leeper's motion, you'd vote no. So yeas and nays, please, on sustaining and supporting the chair. Councillor Moffat.
Councillor Moffat.
Sure.
Conseil Luloff.
Yes.
Councillor Harder.
Yes.
Councillor Kavanagh.
No.
Councillor Suds.
Yes.
Councillor Deroux.
Yes.
Conseil Cloutier.
Oui.
Councillor Leeper.
No.
Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor El Shantiri.
Yes.
Councillor Gower.
Yes.
Councillor Eglai.
Yes.
Councillor Shirelli. Councillor McKenney.
No.
Councillor Menard.
Embarrassing. No.
Councillor Meehan.
Yes.
Conseil Fleury.
No.
Councillor Brockington.
No.
Councillor King.
No.
Councillor Hubley.
Yes.
Councillor Deans. Councillor Dudas.
Yes.
Mayor Watson.
Yes.
14 yeas, 7 nays.
Okay. Our next series of motions are motions requiring suspension of the rules of procedure. The first one is by Councillor Kavanagh, seconded by Councillor Brockington, with respect to the World Health Organization on suspension. Carried? Carried?
Carried.
Councillor Kavanagh, would you like to introduce your motion, please?
Thank you. It's childcare. It's on childcare. Do you want to put it up? Yeah. Yes. I'll go right down to the whereases. It's been a long day. That's okay. You want to put it right down to the whereases? Or sorry,
Sure. Can we get?
Sorry, the be resolved. Yeah.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and I want to thank Jason Sabaran, who is our child care expert with the city, who worked a lot on this draft, as well as my colleague, Councillor Brockington, who also put a lot of heart into this. It's very important that we have child care for the recovery. People just can't go back to work unless we have that. We saw what's happened with the boards of education, where people are asking for kids to get back. Kids also need that daycare as well. It's for them, it's for the parents, it's part of our economy, but we need more help from the province. So therefore, be it resolved that the Ottawa City Council requests the Government of Ontario to prioritize children as part of the overall recovery plan and develop and release publicly a comprehensive plan to ensure safe, full capacity return in the fall to licensed children and early on services to assist in the well-being of children and families and to help with the economic recovery. This comprehensive plan needs to be communicated with sufficient time for providers to implement and to better support for families in the fall. Be it further resolved that the City Council requests the Government of Ontario provide clarity to municipalities on the total provincial allocation in order to fully utilize supports for families and providers and to not create undue municipal pressures and continue to provide stable and ongoing provincial funding for licensed child care centres, home providers, and early on providers for the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic, and ensure these providers can continue to support families with increased health and safety measures while avoiding any cost increases for families. And be it further resolved that the City Council requests the Government of Ontario and the Government of Canada to develop a national childcare strategy to make childcare more accessible for all families, which is essential to economic recovery.
Okay, so does anyone have any questions or comments? I don't know if I can't see another speaker here. If we can just change my screen for a moment.
Carried.
No one else? Carried?
Carried.
Okay, thank you. Next is another suspension of the rules of procedure moved by Councillor Harder, seconded by Councillor El Shantiri with respect to the appointment of an acting chief building official. On suspension? Carried?
Carried.
Councillor Harder, if you'd like to introduce the motion, please. Maybe just the therefore be it resolved.
Yeah, it's time to say goodbye to our chief building official, Frank Bedin. He's been with the city, and including the city of Nepean, for 38 years. He served us extremely well. Therefore, be it resolved that on behalf of the Ottawa City Council, Mayor Watson convey our congratulations and appreciation to the outgoing chief building official, Mr. Frank Bedin, and extend council's best wishes on his retirement. Most recently, at the beginning of COVID, what he and his team did overnight before the first stage was put into effect was a record of building permits, and how he's helped us through tornadoes and floods has been remarkable. So be further resolved that John Buck be appointed effective Monday, August the 17th, 2020, as the acting chief building official for the City of Ottawa, and that a bylaw to give effect to this appointment be enacted. And be it further resolved, the bylaw 2015-6 be repealed effective August 28th, 2020.
What a legend.
Yep.
So on the motion moved by Councillor Harder, seconded by Councillor El Shantiri. Carried. Thank you. Next, requiring suspension is moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Leeper, with respect to commemorative naming. On suspension. Carried. This is a motion that I put forward, and I thank Councillor Leeper as the ward councillor for seconding it, that would honor Jackie Holtzman, our first Jewish woman to become Ottawa mayor, third woman to become mayor of Ottawa. I had the honor of serving 2 terms on council with Jackie. And normally this would go through CPS, but it turns out the bridge is going to be ready to open sooner than we thought, which is great news for the residents on either side of the Queensway going over to Harmer Avenue. So I think it's very fitting and deserving. Jackie's done a lot post being mayor in terms of chair of the old Congress Center, on the NCC board as well. So I'd encourage members to support this befitting name for a champion in our community. Councillor Leeper, would you like to say anything as the ward councillor and the seconder of the motion?
Mayor, I will be supporting this, and thank you for suggesting and bringing it forward. Ms. Holtzman, Mayor Holtzman, is now a resident again of Kitchissippi Ward, and that makes this a little extra special. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak? Again, I don't have it on my sheet.
I just want to say this is very appropriate. This is Councillor Kavanagh. And I'm sorry to lose her as a constituent, as she just moved into Kitchissippi. Totally unfair. But I really appreciate this naming. I think it's very appropriate. As a female mayor, we have only had 3 of them, so let's celebrate them all. And I'm really happy that she's having this honor. Thank you.
Maybe we can move her back in with the ward boundary review.
Yeah.
Well, we've actually, just to be not too fine a point, but we've had a number of amazing female mayors of the old, previous to amalgamation, Janet Stavinga, Mary Pitt, Betty Hill, Giselle Lalonde, Beryl Plumtree. So there have been some great female mayors.
And the famous Claudette Kane.
Claudette Kane, Merle Nichols, absolutely. I've gone down that slippery slope now. So on the motion, carried. Adopté. Thank you. Next is a commemorative naming as well. Suspension of the rules by Councillor Harder and Tierney. On suspension, carried. So Councillor, if you would like to introduce Treehouse Mike. to us.
Yes, back in when I was first elected, well, in the late 90s, I had a bunch of kids out here in Barrhaven that loved to skateboard, and they were, petitioning all the time for a skateboard place. And Mike was one of them, and he, we ended up building one out of just bits and pieces in the front yard of the Walter Baker, which caused no small amount of trouble, as you can imagine, to all the older folks coming in and et cetera, but he really was a champion. Most of those kids learned how to skateboard on the old ramp that used to be at the back of the Walter Baker. It was extremely dangerous, but they had a ball. 2 other skate parks were built, cobbling more pieces together until we came together. And one of those people was Aaron Kaye as well, who he has sent a letter in today, and he is the facilitator in the government, statistical engineer in the government, but one heck of a skateboarder. So he's like in his later 30s, grew up in Barrhaven, same thing, and he sent in a letter of support as well. Mike went on to very great things when he left here, and sadly he passed away. He would have turned, his birthday would have been at the end of, before the next council meeting. And his sister lives in Councillor Scott Moffat's ward, and he had a tremendous effect on her. He actually died prematurely on his 969th career base jump when his parachute failed to open during a jump in Switzerland. And he'll always be remembered for his willingness to help others and his adventurous spirit. So really the timing is, because of his birthday and because of all that he's done for that particular sport in Barrhaven, that we name, it hasn't got a name, it's just called Berrigan, that we name the skate park at Berrigan Park, Treehouse Mike Skate Park.
Okay, so I see no one to speak on this. So Councillor Harder, seconded by Councillor Tierney's motion with respect to Treehouse Mike skate park. Carried.
Carried.
That reminds me, Councillor McKenney, of that great skateboard park at Gladstone and Bronson.
Yeah. Absolutely, and Aaron Kaye was instrumental in that too. The Charlie Bowens
that's
park.
right. Yeah.
And Charlie was part of the group out here that built the Berrigan one as well. Yes, he was. Yes, he was.
And
we should skateboard together, Jan.
It's used very well, that's for sure. So we have another motion requiring suspension of the rules of procedure by Councillor Brockington, seconded by Councillor Tierney, with respect to active transportation to and from school. Councillor, on suspension? Carrie?
Carrie.
Councillor Brockington, the floor is yours and the motion is on the screen.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to my colleague, Transportation Chair Tierney, for his support on this motion. With schools expected to reopen in September, it is believed that not as many children will be riding the yellow school bus as normal, which means there will be more children walking, cycling, and or being driven to school because of that. So this motion is really focused on improving school zone safety within school zones and doing a number of things that we can do, or at least reprioritize, all within budget. So it asks for 4 things. One is that we embark on a 1-month public service campaign to promote active transportation. The second is that we focus in school zones on line painting that needs to be done before school starts, both the crosswalks and traffic calming. Third is to get the school crossing guards that we've already approved in the 2020 budget hired, and then we have to do a warrant study. Traffic Services will do the warrant study. And the fourth is that we want to ensure that bylaws normal campaign for late August, September will continue in 2020. They do a lot of good work in school zones, both enforcement but also education, and we don't want to see any changes with that this year. So highly encourage students to walk and ride their bikes anyway as their first choice to get to school, but hopefully with a PSA campaign out in August, we can really make people aware that kids are coming back in late August, early September, and there's some things the city can do now through this motion to make sure we're ready to go and school zones are as safe as they can. So again, thanks.
Carried.
Mayor Tierney.
Carried.
Okay, on the motion by Councillor Brongdon, seconded by Councillor Tierney. Carried.
Carried.
Thank you. Merci. Our next item requiring suspension of the rules of procedure is with respect to the flooding that had an impact on certain roads in Constance Bay. So on suspension, carried. Councillor El Shantiri, if you'd like to deal with this, because I know this has been a serious problem with the 2 floods in 3 years, basically has ruined a number of the roads right next parallel to the river.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thanks to my colleagues for supporting waiving the rules. Mr. Mayor, if you remember, we reached out to the province for some assistance after the flood, as the city of Ottawa spent quite a bit of money on our roads. So those roads subject today is roads, they were used during the flood by heavy equipment and heavy trucks so they can avoid Bayview Drive, which is the main drag in Constance Bay. So those roads, it's called neighborhood roads, they get really damaged. And as when you wrote to the province, unfortunately, with the COVID-19 arrived, the province declined to support us with the $3.8 million help. So those roads, there are 4 local roads. They've been surface treatment, which is not even asphalt or paved, about 30 years ago. So you can just see the condition. Last year, just to repair one small road, it cost $850 potholes to fill. So I work with staff, and there's no cost to anyone. I have using my cash in lieu and making swamp and put that money back to fix those roads who really, really badly need it. So I'm looking for your support. I'm looking for my colleagues' support. I work with staff, Mr. Willis, the General Manager of Land Infrastructure, and his staff help us with this motion. Mr. Tim Mark also make sure we're all within our legal limit. There's no impact on anyone except for myself to use the cash in lieu to be able to make a swamp and have those roads being prepared, because they're not even on the next 5 years a list of roads to be upgraded or repaired in our area. So I would ask my colleague for support.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Leeper, I think, had a comment. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you.
Sorry?
This motion moved by myself, second by Councillor Harder, just for the record.
Yeah, it's seconded by Councillor Harder. Councillor Leeper, I'm sorry, did you have a question?
I do. I'm just wondering, and I don't oppose this to Councillor El Shantiri, but I'm concerned about a slippery slope. I've got a really significant cash in lieu fund that we've been building up the entire time I've been councillor to get the La Roche Park Fieldhouse under construction. And I'm worried that if this motion passes, that we're going to start seeing requests from residents to start using our cash in lieu funds to accomplish repairs that our taxes should be paying for. I'm just wondering from staff, what kind of precedent is there for this kind of a use of CIL, and what kind of precedent do you feel it creates?
Mr. Mayor, if I may, this is actually a fairly unique situation where Councillor El Shantiri had a project already underway that could have used CIL money because it was eligible under the law to use CIL and had not. It had tax-based funding. So in this instance, we are using the CIL money to put for that project and then repurposing the CIL money. Generally, Council is considerably constrained about the use of CIL dollars, and if Councillor El Shantiri didn't have an eligible project already, we would not have been able to do this.
That works for me. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, and I can attest to one of those roads where I blew a tire just outside the lighthouse, Councillor El Shantiri. I think that's one of the roads you look at. Councillor Harder?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Because Councillor Leeper was asking for a couple of examples, Councillor Eglai will remember, and actually Councillor Shirelli contributed too, but I think Councillor Eglai and I put $100,000 each into the Minto Fields after the situation we had there with the incorrect turf. not in my area, but certainly impacted people in primarily, not even primarily in Nepean, but Myers football and more. So we did that. I also contributed $100,000 for my, not very large, because we in the suburbs we do have lots of parks that get built, but $100,000 for the Barhaven Food Bank. And then I have spent a lot of money at the Walter Baker, because the Walter Baker is turning 40 this year, and we're not investing in the building the way we need to maintain. So I pick a couple of projects a year, and the whole community is better for it. So sometimes it's just good to stick to the rules, but actually to have that wiggle room that benefits a lot more people.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harder, for that snapshot. On the motion, carried? Carried, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Eli. The next motion requiring suspension of the rules is by Councillor Harder, seconded by Councillor El-Shantiri, with respect to temporary zoning to allow schools to use lands to expand if required in order to facilitate opening in the fall of 2020-2021 school year as a result of COVID-19. Councillor Harder, if you'd like to introduce. Sorry, on suspension. Carried. Thank you, Councillor Harder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I want to thank, first of all, Councillor Ralston King, who yesterday took the time to call Mike Carson, who most of us know, the CFO at the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, just to make sure that concerns that he had were addressed, but all of us understanding that we've got to do our part for our city. It will be the decision of our 4 boards as to how they can accommodate all our kids to get them back to school. We know that our Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Esches, spoke at the Ottawa Carleton District School Board meeting earlier this week. We know that she has been speaking out loudly, and Councillor Eglai as well, Chair Eglai as well, saying that, you know, the kids can't go back in dribs and drabs. They have to go back. I need them back in the school. They need to be back in the school. So last week when I was speaking with Mr. Carson, I said, you know, would it be helpful when you make up your mind as to how you're going to make this short-term accommodation very quickly within 6 weeks, if we can help you by easing the path for temporary zoning. This is not about building anything new. This could be about repurposing buildings that we have that are empty. And we don't even know if it's about portables, because it's like buses. There's not a factory somewhere with a bunch of portables hanging around waiting to be chosen. It's just about us helping our partners at the school boards to find accommodation, to make it happen in time for children in our city to get back to school. It's really not more difficult than that, even though there's a whole bunch of rules associated with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor King, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'd like to thank Councillor Harder for introducing this motion. I agree with the sentiment behind it in terms of a motion for temporary zoning for schools, but of course there are some community concerns, especially in one of my neighborhoods, Manor Park, and so that's why I'd like just to ask questions of staff in terms of the school board and their capacity to introduce new permanent hard surfaces such as pavements under this motion, whether that's possible to support temporary structures like portables. So once again, the question really is to staff, what staff estimation concerning this motion allowing the creation of new permanent hard surfaces such as parking lots?
Mr. Mayor, the tool that we're proposing that staff being able to use, and Mr. Mark can assist me if he has anything to add, is a temporary use bylaw. And by very nature of it, temporary uses are intended to only be there for 3 years. And I don't see a proposal for a permanent change to a site as fitting the criteria under which this authority would be used. They would have to go through the normal planning application process for a permanent change. So the intention here is this be used for temporary changes, and we basically tried to provide the fastest track process available to help the school boards as possible under the law, and that's our intention. And certainly would be any in using the authority council gives us, would be in close communications with the councillors' offices.
Thank you for that. I also got some confirmation of that when talking to school board officials yesterday. So I am very thankful for that, because that really does reassure the community. The community also uses green space, so in the school property. So I was just curious whether portables can be installed on green space.
Mr. Mayor, in these exceptional circumstances, it is a possibility they could be there, but by the nature of a temporary use bylaw, and we normally do when we give site plan approvals, if something's for a temporary use, we also require a reinstatement plan to its original condition when the use ceases. And that's the sort of thing we could put in the requirements. But, you know, the issue is to provide the maximum flexibility to the school board to meet their requirements to provide the service, and we can address, as I said, the restoration after it's no longer needed.
And restoration, based on some of the changes to this motion before it was advanced, would that also involve the consultation of the ward councillor?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, it would absolutely involve consultation with the ward councillor.
Well, thank you. I think that my community's concerns have been addressed, and I'll be happy to support this motion.
Great. Excuse me. Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else wish to speak on the motion by Councillor Harder, second by Councillor El-Shantiri? Councillor Leeper.
Carried.
We spoke too soon. Councillor Leeper, do you have a question?
No, I'll lower my hand. I am very pleased that Mr. Wilson made that commitment to consultation with the community. There are going to be some things the schools want to do that are going to be controversial in the community, but we need to make sure that those schools have the flexibility they need. And I got the assurance from Mr. Willis I needed yesterday with respect to consultation. Thank you.
Okay, on the motion as presented, carried.
Carried.
Next is a motion with respect to patio operating hours. There's been some back and forth on this. Councillor Fleury, is Councillor Eglai still your seconder?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Councillor, do you have a seconder?
Yes, Councillor Moffat.
So on suspension of the rules, this is with respect to patio hours, I believe in rights of way or in the Byward Market. On suspension, carried?
Carried.
So Councillor, I know you've been in discussions with, I think, my office. There seems to be some disunity on this motion with respect to some of the proprietors downtown. Could you maybe just introduce it and explain what the difference of opinion is?
Sure. So the motion, is it on the screen here? So just in the context of COVID, in the context of the street closures, and in the context of violations and incidents that have happened since March, but mainly over the last month, staff, my understanding is public health, right-of-way, and bylaw have proposed a motion, which I fully support, seeing the challenges in that area. So I'll read that therefore be it resolved, and I'm glad to give additional context here. Therefore be it resolved that council approve that right-of-way patio bylaw be amended as follow. 1, all right-of-way patios right-of-way permit issued in the Byward Market in the area bordered by St. Patrick, King Edward, Rideau, and Sussex be subject to a closure of 12 a.m. until October 31st. The midnight closure will go into effect as of Friday, July 17th. All right-of-way patio permits include the condition that the province emergency orders and public health guidelines related to COVID-19 must be observed, or the permits will be revoked by the General Manager of Planning and Infrastructure in consultation with the General Manager of Emergency and Protective Service. Be it further resolved that the General Manager of PED, in consultation with the Medical Officer of Health and General Manager of EPS, be delegated authority by Council to adjust the right-of-way patio permit closure hours on any right-of-way patio permit issued throughout the city through to October 31st on the basis of public health concern, and 2, that the General Manager of PED and Emergency Protective Services be directed to issue a memo to Council prior to August 26th. Council meeting detailing the number of notices of violation issued with regards to right-of-way patio permits and any other observation, including recommendation on whether to adjust the 12 a.m. closure time to the Byron market for the remainder of 2020. Mr. Mayor, so I know you've received, Council received at 6:47 an email from the Executive Director of the BIA. As you might imagine, I've heard both good and bad all day today as it relates to this issue. I would invite members of Council to go down to the area, see how good it looks in terms of the closures. At the same time, how many operators have expanded their patios. Last weekend alone, bylaw services identified a number of violators who didn't close on time, who had noise concerns, and obviously top of mind in all of this is the COVID period around physical distancing, and now with the bylaw with mask wearing. So there's inconsistency in the standards. Currently, out of the 56 right-of-way patios, 20 are supposed to close at 11, while the remainder are to close at 2 a.m. What we recognize is as of Friday, all of these operators will be able to have up to 50 people inside their premise. So in responding to that, Mr. Mayor, maybe we could let staff provide the context of the motion. The staff wrote it, and I'm obviously supportive of it.
So who would you like, Mr. DeMonte or Mr. Willis?
I think they were all working on it together, so I'm not sure. Maybe both?
Well, who would like to speak from staff on this? Because there's obviously some opposition to the proposal from some of the owners, and I haven't seen the BIA letter myself. So Councillor Tierney, you have the floor. You're next.
Well, Mr. Mayor, we just asked staff to introduce their motion. Obviously, I am supporting it.
Mr. Mayor, perhaps
have we had any consultation with the bar owners and restaurateurs?
Mr. Mayor, perhaps I can give some context to this and explain staff's position. So staff had started a process to try to harmonize the various patio right-of-way patio closing times. Last fall, we had begun consultations with some of the ward councillors and the former chair of Transportation Committee with the goal of bringing a report to Transportation Committee this fall to bring some consistency in it. You can appreciate that having a bunch of different closing times is confusing to the proprietors who own these. It's confusing for bylaws, regulatory services to be able to enforce it, and it doesn't allow us to communicate clearly to the public what the expectations are. So on top of what we intended to do, which is to bring some consistency, the confusion of the situation is the rapidly changing rules in the province of who can open on what date. And so staff are in a position right now, the councillor asked us to advance the work that we intended to do to bring some consistency forward so that everybody, for example, on the Byward market be treated the same. And I think it's our goal ultimately that everybody across the city would be treated the same. But the issue Councillor Fleury points out about 40% in the market have one set of rules and 60% have another set of rules right now. There's a fairness issue, and we would try to advance it right now. So that's why staff assisted to write a motion at this point in time to get one common set of rules. And so we have two objectives of any motion council would adopt. One is to make a fair set of common rules, and the second is still to promote social distancing and safe operations while businesses do reopen and operate. Those are the two common goals we wish to have. So the motion as constructed really tries to do that. We had staff had several conversations with various players about different potential closing times to bring it consistent. You could have gone to 2, which is the furthest, which some do. You could have gone to 11, which is some do, which is the earliest time. And the number 12 was settled on in discussions. I can't say it's a staff position because staff have no evidence in which to give council a recommended position. But it was picked at 12 to be consistent with the rules in Gatineau because there was a concern that people were coming across the river from Gatineau to Ottawa and flooding the market afterwards. And that was why that time was put in the motion when staff assisted to write it. but I have to say, in consultation with Mr. DeMonte and Dr. Etches and others, we have no evidence to say to council one time or another is better than the other. It's just that we urge council to create some consistency in this motion and send a strong signal of the expectation that the operators have to abide by the rules. The second part of the motion, really the further resolved, is about what happens in the time period, the next couple of weeks when council's not sitting, and we find a situation where the situation needs further controls, and this is where there is a mechanism that should the general manager of Emergency and Protective Services and the chief medical officer of health write to me and indicate to me that they're concerned that we have an uncontrolled situation, that we have some authority while council's not meeting to take some corrective action. But ultimately, this matter must come before our Chair Tierney's committee in the fall, because ultimately they have jurisdiction over this issue, and this is a stopgap measure, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, this is, I think, when we get ourselves in trouble, these motions that obviously haven't gone out for great wide public consultation. So I think we should hear from Councillor Tierney, the chair of the Transportation Committee, for his advice. Councillor.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I think you're quite correct. I think there's a lot of us that have heard the businesses speaking up. And at the same time, while I certainly respect the ward councillors' concern, especially around the COVID stuff. And I think that's what this is really about. I would like to ask Steve, and you're quite correct, this is definitely one thing that I want fixed in the fall. I want to see this at Transportation Committee, because what I'm discovering very quickly is the hodgepodge of rules that exist on Elgin, in Byward. It's weird because bylaw, and please confirm if this is the case, as they're walking around bar to bar with their notepad, with the spreadsheet, they're going, okay, well, this bar is good till 11, and this bar, because of grandfathering, is good till 2, and this one, 11 again, and it's a real mishmash of different situations. So can you comment on how we got to this point with this Tetris kind of puzzle of rules?
Mr. Mayor, if Mr. Curry is on the line, he knows the history of this. I would appreciate if he could assist me in providing the background.
Thanks, Steve. So, Mayor, city staff did bring forward the City of Ottawa's first right-of-way patio bylaw to Council in 2017. And at that time, there was a motion moved at Council to, in effect, create two categories of operating hour conditions. Pre-2017, you had the conditions of your existing permit. Post-2017, if you were a new restaurant or a new permit holder, you would have an 11 p.m. closure, provided that you were within a residential and commercial zone, which is effectively all of our main streets and patio areas. So as been pointed out today, there is a dichotomy, and we do have businesses that are side by side that have differing closure hours. We recognize that there are noise issues, there are other externalities, and we've been logging them for the last 3 years. As Mr. Willis pointed out, it was staff's intention to bring forward this winter or early spring a recommendation to Transportation Committee on how to resolve this issue ahead of the season. Obviously, it didn't happen because of COVID, but certainly would be our intention after watching the behavior this summer to bring forward a report to committee in November or December for 2021.
So this is, yeah, and I appreciate that, and certainly we talked about that. I want to see this top of the deck. Also, I'm looking at the fact in this scenario here with Councillor Fleury's motion, some would actually get an extra hour, but then you're actually ripping hours away from others, and I think we've heard that by email and and had a good conversation with some of the business people, especially today, by email back and forth with a few. And I'm trying to, would that be correct that some would gain an hour and others would lose a couple of hours?
Yes, Mayor. As the councillor pointed out, there are 56 patios that we are about to permit in the Byward Market area. They've been operating with insurance, but we have not permitted them pending this decision. So yes, 36 would have a reduction of 2 hours, 20 would gain 1 hour. The motion does outline that this would be reviewed and brought forward to the council meeting at the end of August for reconsideration based on what we see on the ground over the next few weekends, and certainly the impact of stage 3 and the ability for folks to have interior capacity right now.
Okay, so, and yeah, I guess the other thing too is what happened with the Gatineau situation. I think this is what really led to Councillor Fleury doing this. There was a concern of a flood of people, and I think we've heard from our experts that there's no empirical data on that creating a bit of an issue, but right now they've moved their hours from 3 o'clock to midnight on the other side of the river?
That's correct, Chair.
Okay, so, I look at this and say maybe that's how they came up with the 12, but at the same time, we really do have a problem. I mean, we're in the neighborhood talking about all these restaurants, Mother Tucker's, the fish market, all these different places closing. It's a real hindrance for these groups. Certainly, I know we need a full public, wholesome debate, and I think you'll take that as direction. I want that first of the agenda for transportation to harmonize this real gerrymander's been used so many times the last week. System that we have, there has to be one set of rules for people that we can adapt. So we'll deal with that with the public at full committee of transportation when we get to that point. But in the interim, with this COVID situation, I've consulted with business. I've consulted with Janza, the one that's emailed as well. They're quite happy understanding the COVID situation, and I'll be looking to move a motion. The seconder will be Jenna Sudds, to take the principles of what's in Fleury's motion, simply amending it to say to the hours of 1 a.m., just till September. And just remind everybody, this is going to take place until September, COVID time, so when we review things again. And at that point, we can look at possibly moving ahead with the ultimate goal is to fix the situation, level the playing field for all of our businesses that are out there that are suffering right now. So I hope my council colleagues support me on this 1 a.m. Motion, and maybe even Councillor Fleury will support that, and we can keep our businesses happy and keep everybody else safe. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, I'll, based on this was a staff motion. I'm glad to remove my motion altogether. I see there's a lot of questions. It's not working well right now, but let's push it to the fall. Again, this was what I believe to be an initiative from right-of-way, bylaw, and public health. If that becomes unclear, I'm glad we've been, it's 8 o'clock. There's current rules in place, and those will apply.
Sorry, Councillor, I'm not clear on what you're doing. Are you withdrawing your motion and you will accept Councillor Tierney's 1 o'clock compromise?
No, the current situation, although not standard, offers better protection under the COVID situation.
Sorry, you're getting cut off there. Can you speak up? I didn't hear that last part.
No, I believe that let's have the full debate in time. I recognize the citywide and the different district issue. I think we're better served as a neighborhood without if the motion isn't to be brought forward. Again, my motion is a staff motion, and I sent staff in. Obviously, it's been a long day. It's been a lot of emails all day. And I would have 2 points to add that can be just that I did speak to the chair of the BIA of Byron Market, and he was not consulted on his executive director's memo to us about an hour ago. And there was a statement from the Public Health of Canada this afternoon that really speaks to the issue that we're facing with these types of operators. So I'm glad to read a segment if you would allow me.
Well, I'm just not clear. Did the bar owners and restaurateurs know that this was coming to council today? This motion?
Maybe Mr. Curry can speak to it. I believe the staff did work with OCOBIA and inform BIA and Ottawa markets.
So, Mr. Curry, did you go out and consult? They seem to be surprised that this motion is before us. So I need some clarification because Councillor Fleury is saying it's the staff motion. Is it your motion that you've brought forward, and was there consultation?
So, Mayor, I'll take the second part of your question first. So certainly over the last few months, predating COVID, this was a recognized issue in the byward market area for the reasons I outlined earlier that have been covered today. So certainly this has been an ongoing issue raised by the BIA and the shop owners, particularly in the last few weeks as they've been able to open up. As Mr. Willis advised, there's been numerous points of view in terms of the appropriate hours provided over the last week. It was determined yesterday in consultation with my colleagues in Emergency Protective Services and Ottawa Public Health that 12 o'clock was the appropriate hour. That being said, the situation, as they say, is fluid. It continues to be, particularly as we found out the regulations in the last 24 hours on stage 3. So last night, the BIA was provided a copy of Councillor Fleury's motion. Ocobia was contacted yesterday afternoon and was to engage their members because it should be noted that there's authority in here to apply to citywide. This is not just byward specific, should there be evidence brought forward of public health concerns in other areas. So that consultation was undertaken. We recognize that it was very quick in the last 48 hours, but issues arose over the weekend, and this being the last council before the end of the summer, it really eliminated the opportunity to have fulsome discussions that have been already ongoing for the last few months.
Okay, so I'm assuming that bylaw and Mr. Willis, the current situation is really untenable. It's an awkward hodgepodge, as we've heard. I think Councillor Fleury's point is valid to try to get some uniform sets of rules so everyone plays by the same rules. I think we have a dispute whether it's going to be 12 or 1. You've withdrawn your motion. Councillor Tierney, are you moving a motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I think we need the clarity, and also it gives opportunity for some of these boroughs that do have this puzzle piece situation that have to close at 11 versus others that can be open at 12 or 1. If we withdraw it, we're putting our businesses at risk again. I'm glad we brought this forward. If we were doing it under the guise of coronavirus and safety, clearly, now we're at a point where we've identified an issue. Is it till 2 a.m. like it could be at the end of the year and fall when we come back and debate this with the public and business? No. But 1 a.m. is a good compromise to be able to afford our businesses the opportunity to operate and keep their heads above water. It's every second day we have a business closing down in the byward market, and there's been a lot of consultation. I've spoken with Janta. I've spoken with many of the businesses in there. They're very satisfied with this until we bring this to Transportation Committee to have a wholesome debate with the public. So I would encourage my council members to please support myself and Councillor Sudd's motion on this, moving to 1 a.m. till September.
So we'll need a copy of the motion. I just want to be clear here. Mr. Willis or DeMonte, is there some ability if this motion passes, this so-called compromise for 1 o'clock, if we continue to have problems with certain restaurants, do you have the authority to revoke their right-of-way permission as a bit of a tool in your toolkit to control an out-of-control or rowdy situation? I don't know if that's Mr. Curry or Willis or DeMonte can answer that.
I think it's Mr. Curry. Mr. DeMonte, go ahead first.
Sorry, Tony? Do you have the authority to, if there's a problem, do you have the authority or do we have to give you that authority? Because I think Councillor Fleury has a legitimate issue. The market, I think there were 16 infractions, if I'm not mistaken, on the weekend. And we want to make sure that we don't see the numbers spike up on COVID. But I think it's untenable to leave it the way it is, where you have some people at 11, some people at 2. And I think what Councillor Tierney's trying to do is to come up with a compromise, but there needs to be some ability that you can move in to say, you know what, we've given you a warning, you've had too many people on the patio or the noise levels or whatever your criteria is. Do you have that authority now?
So, Mayor, you're absolutely right. First, with regards to Councillor Tierney's motion, yes, harmonization would allow even rules across the board, and that's extremely important for us. I believe, and I'll let Mr. Willis or Mr. Curry answer with regards to conditions being put on the patios that we could do that. But it was brought up earlier, and that's what we're seeking to. It would be important for us to be able to have over the period, if we see, while you're not here, we see challenges, both myself or Dr. Etches, Mr. Willis can then pull the permit from an individual. So we would need that authority over that time until Chair Attorney has a more fulsome debate and resolve this instability between the different issues.
I don't know about others. It's really hard to hear that. It was choppy. So, Councillor Tierney, do you have a motion? Do we?
Yeah, it is exactly the same as Councillor Fleury's. I liked a lot of the content that's there. The only difference is the hours. It says 12 o'clock in Councillor Fleury's, and I've just emailed the clerk. They should get it in a minute. To just swap out the names and swap in the time. This will solve many issues. And it's funny, Mr. Mayor, just to, I'll wrap up if there's debate on this actual motion itself.
Okay, so Councillor Fleury, you've withdrawn yours. Councillor Tierney's brought forward something. Are you willing to support the change from 12 to 1 for continuity?
No, I think we're missing a bigger point, right? A number of offenders over the last weekend who did not close on time, and noise issues. Keep in mind, within that bucket, you have about 20 operators that are supposed to close at 11. So in my view, you might be fixing an issue, which is standardization, but you're creating a whole different issue during COVID. So I'd much rather, let's refer that appropriately back to Transportation Committee. We're living with the rules we have. Staff thought it was a good initiative to correct. I don't think we're going to get to a consensus position now, and obviously there's work and discussions to have. In the same point that you raised earlier, there had been limited consultations to this. There's obviously limited consultations to the current proposal. So I would just ask members to refer to committee at the appropriate time, and we can engage, have the right discussion. Until then, staff have the range of situations in hand.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I'd be remiss not to provide additional information to clarify for your...
Sorry, Tony, I don't know, maybe if you turn off your camera, the sound might improve, because it's really difficult. I don't know if others are having the same trouble. It's very choppy here.
Also, Mr. Mayor, I'd be remiss not to provide supplemental information. So on the weekend, there were some challenges, noise complaints. We also worked with our partners at HECO, but there were no violations for closures. And just to be clear, we would support whatever motion council decides, but a harmonized time that allows us the best tool to be able to enforce and create an environment where people can enjoy themselves and the businesses can operate fully. So that's would be our preference from an enforcement perspective.
So, Mr. Willis, I'm assuming, and to Mr. DeMonte, you do not support the status quo. Is that a fair statement, or can you live with this?
Mr. Mayor, there are two answers. One is the status quo, it creates unfairnesses from businesses because you have side-by-side businesses with different sets of rules. So as Mr. DeMonte said, it also supports enforcement fairness by ensuring that we're all treating people equally. That's important. The second point I want to answer is a question that Mr. DeMonte wasn't able to answer because of the previous communications issues, is the therefore further resolved portion does give me, if council passes this motion, it gives me the authority on the recommendation of the general manager, EPS, or the chief medical officer of health to revoke any permit where there's a problem, which was a question that was asked earlier. So that is part of the motion, and that's a tool we would not have if council doesn't pass a motion.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. So just to be clear, Councillor Tierney, you're willing to move Councillor Fleury's old motion, and where it says 12 a.m., you would put it 1 a.m. Is that correct? Anywhere on the motion that says 12, it would go to 1.
That's correct. I've also contacted the clerk at this point.
Sorry?
Yes, that would be correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so we have a motion by Councillor Tierney, seconded by Councillor Suds. that is basically the same as the flurry motion, with the exception of on item 1, it would say closure of 1 a.m. until October 31st. And then item 2, it would say 1 a.m. closure will go into effect on Friday, July 17th. Then Mr. Willis indicated, I think item 3 gives the authority to revoke if there's problems with the 1 a.m. And then be it further resolved deals with delegated authority. And then second is the GM be directed to what is this, council meeting detailing the number of notices of violations, and then we change that to 1 a.m. as well. Mr. Clerk or Deputy Clerk, does that cover what the intent of Councillor Tierney's motion is all about?
That is my understanding of what the Tierney-Sudds motion that is before you.
Okay, so everyone's clear. That's the motion before us. And we will now, there's a number of people that want to speak to this, so if I can clear the screen and then determine who has their hand up. So we have Councillor Hubley and 4 others. So Councillor Hubley, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be brief. I was worried with the original motion because I think these businesses are just reopening, and I'd like to see us as a councillor do whatever we can possibly to support these businesses, and they're creating the jobs in our community. It's bringing back some sense of normalcy in our community. So I'd like to see us do whatever we can. I like the Tierney motion. I'll support the Tierney motion. However, one thing I'd like to hear or give direction to staff to do is that as they go forward and study this and come out with a possible proposal in the fall, I'd like to see at a minimum a 1-week consultation period with the businesses and not 24 hours. They have to know what we're doing because we're affecting their livelihoods. So would that be deemed an okay direction to staff? Would they accept that?
Yes, Mayor, absolutely. As I noted, this was exceptional in terms of the timelines between the observations and the last council meeting, but it is absolutely not our standard practice. We will be going through a COBIA and we will be doing fulsome public engagement.
Perfect. That's all I wanted to get on the record, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dudas, please.
So, for clarification, does this apply to any businesses outside of the market?
Mr. Curry.
The Mayor, the 1 a.m. closure would apply to solely the areas outlined in the motion, so the byword market. However, the operative clause in the motion does provide Mr. Willis, upon the advice of the Medical Officer of Health and Mr. Devonte, with the opportunity to reduce the patio hours anywhere else within the City of Ottawa, right-of-way patio hours, I should be clear, anywhere else in the City of Ottawa, should there be public health concerns.
Okay, so that would only be on the basis of public health concerns issued by whom? By Ottawa Public Health, not just a random complainant?
Correct. My understanding of the motion is on the basis of the advice from Ottawa Public Health.
Okay, anything else, Councillor Dudas?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay, excuse me. Thank you. Councillor Elshantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I will be supporting Councillor, sorry, I have a problem. I will be supporting Councillor Tierney's motion. But, Mr. Mayor, I find it ironically, the businesses, and I know Councillor Hubley just said that, and now we're tying that hand with Simon and others. So I don't understand. So does that mean if folks came into to Elgin Street or any other part of the city, is that okay? But it's not okay to be in the byword market, whereas those businesses been suffering the most since they're mostly bars and restaurants, they didn't take advantage of the takeout restaurants like some restaurants did on Elgin or other areas. So I don't understand why even we need this, unless Mr. Willis, I know I heard you say you need, but why going to ask for what you need from us without this motion.
Mr. Mayor, as I tried to indicate, staff really wanted this year to do it through a proper process of doing some research, doing consultation with businesses, and Mr. Curry's team would have brought to Chair Tierney's committee a fulsome developed proposal to harmonize the rules. We're forced, because of the situation we're in, to try to deal with what we are concerned is an unfair situation where we literally have neighbors in the district side by side with different sets of rules. And if Mr. DeMonte's team is called, Mr. Chapman's team is called to deal with enforcement, it depends on which address you're at, which set of rules you have. And I think we're trying to address fairness here while facilitate businesses coming back, while addressing the concerns about social distancing. And I appreciate it's a very difficult situation. There is no playbook for this. We're trying to react as the province is changing the rules under our feet as well. So we're trying to find the most fair option that protects public health and safety, and that's what we've tried to accomplish through this process.
Well, I know, Mr. Mayor, I find it ironically something like this, it doesn't come to the mayor's task force, first of all, because we have the Ottawa Council on BAA, we have other people, on, our partner we work with. And to be just in the last minute, we got an email from the executive director of the Byward Market. I don't think that's even fair to make a policy on the fly. And we're trying, I want to support staff and what they need or the tools they need. I'm not convinced doing it this way is the proper way. With the motion, especially with the original motion, which is we just heard from the executive director, not in support of. So if staff looking for tools to be able to implement what they're looking for, by all means, but I mean, that's not time the business has been closed for 4 months and now they start to breathe, or the province gives them room to breathe. Now we're trying to block that. That's where I'm having a problem, even supporting Councillor Tierney at this time, because why this was not brought to us and the mayor's task force? Why was not been circulated before? Why didn't we even talk about it before?
Yeah, listen, it's not an ideal situation. I appreciate that, but this is what we have before us and we got to deal with it. So thank you for your perspective, Councillor. Councillor Luloff, please.
Listen, Mayor, I don't want to drag this on any longer than it has to be. The HECO is clear that it says that bars and patios can serve until 2 p.m. So obviously I want to give as much opportunity, 2 a.m., correct. So I want to give as much opportunity for our business owners as possible to be able to serve the public and turn a profit. I don't understand, look, maybe I do. I do understand the difference between the Byward Market and the rest of our economic development areas and our areas that serve bars, but we'd like to look for as late a solution as possible so that these people can turn a profit. I support Councillor Tierney's motion, and I think that it's a decent compromise.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Leeper, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm actually going to complicate it a bit more by providing another motion to be seconded by Councillor McKenney. What I'm going to move is such that the wording of the motion would be only be it further resolved that one, the general manager of PIED in consultation with the medical officer of health and the general manager of EPS be delegated the authority by council to adjust the row patio permit closing hours on any row patio permit issued throughout the city through to October 31st, 2020 on the basis of public health concerns. What I'm hearing right now is we're trying to create bar hours on the fly. We need to have a broader consultation in order to understand what the appropriate hours should be. But what I'm hearing is the need for a tool immediately that gives our chief or medical officer of health and our city staff the ability to change the hours for problematic bars. So I would like to give them the tool they need to deal with an immediate issue. And I'm happy to wait until later in the summer until there's been a fuller consultation about what bar hours should be. So I'm going to make that motion with Councillor McKenney as a seconder. The language is just at first be it resolved from the original motion, I believe, in the Tierney motion.
So, I'm sorry, I'm not clear. What are you proposing? It was not clear what you're proposing.
I am proposing that we come. Thank you. I am proposing that we come out of this meeting having given staff the tool they need to change the hours on a one-off basis for problematic bars in consultation between emergency services, planning, and the medical officer of health.
Yeah, I think the problem, though, is, Councillor Leeper, is staff are really asking us for help because they have one patio that they have to shut down at 11 and another one that shuts down at 2.
But clearly, Mayor, we're not coming. Can I ask you to turn your mic off, please? Thanks. But clearly, we're not going to come out of this meeting with a well-thought-through, coherent plan for what the bar hours should be. I think that is going to require further discussion with the local councillor, with the BIA, and with staff. But I would like to come out of this meeting with the tool that staff need in order to deal with problems immediately.
Okay, well, I think Councillor Tierney, you're still prepared to move your motion.
That is correct, Mr. Mayor.
And Councillor Leeper, you'll move yours. We'll deal with them in order of receipt. And we still have Councillor Brockington on the list to speak. So we'll have those two motions. We'll deal with the Tierney motion first, then the Leeper motion if the Tierney motion fails. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to staff, can you clarify in clause 1 of this motion the date of October 31st? That date exists because you believe you're going to be able to do a review and come back to Transportation Committee before October 31st? Is that why that date is there?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Curry will probably correct me if I don't get this right, but our patio permits typically for the summer season go to October 31st, and that's why we're just aligning with our normal summer permit timetable. And I'm just looking for Mr. Curry to either nod that I'm correct or correct me if he feels he has to. He wishes to clarify, Mr. Mayor, so can I ask Mr. Curry to clarify?
Yes, Mayor. It was October 31st was chosen, as Mr. Willis said, to coincide with the season, patio season, but it was also chosen because that is the date that the Byward Market road closures will cease to exist. So as a recall for council, 4 road closures were undertaken last week, which have created a fantastic, enticing environment for one to visit the Byward Market, but have unfortunately contributed to some of the social distancing challenges that we've seen over the last weekend and that we expect this weekend.
Does my patio closure time impact my interior bar time closure?
No, Mr. Mayor, that separately, the city has no regulatory role in the inside of the building.
So given that they are going to be allowed to open on Friday, I was worried with this motion that 36 bars are going to close at 1 a.m. as opposed to 2 a.m. And their BIA, which wrote the letter today, was opposed. So I'm comforted that we're not closing all of their business down at 1 a.m., that if the party wants to continue, you can go inside and they will still be allowed to remain open. It's just the patio has to close at this time. And with that clarification, I will be supportive of this motion.
Okay, so Councillor Fleury, did you want to add anything else before we ask Councillor Tierney to wrap up on his motion?
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Maire.
Thank you, Your Worship.
We've seen how BIAs can be challenging. I just want to reaffirm our governance. Our governance is with the Board of Directors, and I want to clarify that I reached out to the chair of the Byward BIA less than an hour ago following Yasna's email to confirm that she had not reached out to the board, to him, before sending that email. So that's important to, we're talking about business position, yet really there was no endorsement of the board on that matter. The other piece is some colleagues, I feel, are making me sound like I'm not business supportive. I think you're forgetting a couple of things. The Byward Market is not a bar-only area. There's a lot of very good bars. There's a lot of good restaurants. There's a lot of other good retailers. With the help of staff over the last number of weeks, we've been able to offer extended closures, which a lot of the businesses have been able to match at least their patios or more from the previous year, which they've all benefited from. On this Friday, inside of the businesses opens to 50. So there's additional capacity all around. We're not shutting them down. What I think is dangerous with the motion that's in front of us is we're having issues today, not simply on standardization. That's certainly one of the core elements. But keep in mind, bylaw was out there and identified businesses that are not compliant with our regulations. Finally, I just want to read you a section that to me says it all, and I think it's important for council to be aware because, you know, I certainly, every time there's a shooting, a stabbing in the market, people look to me and say, hey, local councillor, why did that happen? And I have very little answers for that. And I want you to know that most of those incidents seem to happen near bar close. So it'd be great to have a different approach during the COVID response. Staff have identified issues in relation to COVID, in relation to the right-of-way permits. And then, you know, just to read on, this is a statement from the Chief Public Health Officer of Canada released earlier today. I'll read two small paragraphs here. COVID-19 spreads quickly in crowded places and closed spaces where in close contacts between people infected. Infected individuals can transmit the virus to others even when they look and feel well. It is why it is so important to change the way people gather this summer. We are concerned about the increased number of reports of individuals contracting COVID-19 at parties, nightclubs, and bars, as well as increasing rates of transmission amongst young Canadians in some jurisdictions across the country. Although severe illness due to COVID-19 is not common among young age groups, there have been several reports of several illness among even young and active adults. We are all in this together and have a shared responsibility to keep COVID transmission low. I encourage everyone, especially young adults, to find creative ways to stay socially active in the time of COVID. Singing, mingling, and dancing in close contact with others, in closed spaces and crowded places is not the way to party this summer. These are ideal conditions for the spread of COVID-19. I will not be supporting Councillor Tierney's motion you have to keep in mind we have 20 operators that are forced to close at 11. We're sending the wrong message. To me, the position of 12 o'clock was a compromise position because there's a lot of operators that close at 11 and are not respecting that currently. So I just want you to know where I'm coming from on this issue.
Okay, thank you. So to wrap up, Councillor Tierney, on your motion, please.
Great. I'll keep it very brief. And again, I do want to I want to iterate. First of all, a lot of the stuff that's happened is happening today. And Eli, Dad, you're quite correct. Policy on the fly is a bad idea, especially if it doesn't go hand in hand with consultation with the local businesses. Councillor Flory points out the 20 patios. Well, now they'll be able to go to 1 a.m. Look, that's only helping business in my world. At the same time, we don't want to have the overcrowding that we see. And I've gotten some text messages from some council colleagues saying, go to 2 a.m. Well, we can have that conversation with the public and with the businesses fully engaged the way it should happen. But what we're dealing with now, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're dealing with a lot of situations where places are closing up, and we have to give them a bit of a hand. Now, I do have full support from Jens and that whole group. That only came up today because we're all learning a lot about what's happened today. And look what we've done as a transportation committee. And thank you for support of council. Waiving patio fees, that was a big move, helping them out, save thousands for many of these restaurants, keeping their head above water and employing people. When you talked about, hey, let's throw some barrels in a parking lot with some ribbon, that's your new patio because guess what? People can't go inside. That was something that we did as a committee and as a council to keep those businesses still going. And quite rightly so, Riley points out the fact, 1 a.m., if the parties can't be on the patio, you're going to move inside where they have restrictions on numbers, and if you can't get in, guess what? You're going home. So I think this checks a lot of boxes. Is it optimal? No. Does it satisfy a lot of the concerns that businesses are saying, and as well as the fact not leaving a massive 2-hour gap between Gatineau and us where people could trickle over like the old days when we were younger and do that? I think this is a good harmony. I really hope that I do have council's support on this one, and I'll leave it there, Mr. Matt. Thank you.
Okay, so we have the motion by Councillor Tierney, seconded by Councillor Suds. Carried? Dissent by yeas and nays. Yeas and nays have been called. Sorry, folks. Yeas and nays have been called. So this is on the Tierney-Suds motion.
Councillor Moffat. That was a yes, I think. Councillor Luloff.
Good compromise, yes.
Councillor Harder.
Yes.
Councillor Kavanagh.
No.
Councillor Suds.
Yes.
Councillor Derouse.
Absolutely yes.
Councillor Cloutier.
Oui.
Councillor Leeper.
No.
Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor El Shantiri.
Yes.
Councillor Gower.
Yes.
Councillor Eglai.
Yes.
Councillor Shirelli. Councillor McKenney.
No.
Councillor Menard.
No.
Councillor Meehan.
Yes.
Conseil Fleury.
No.
Councillor Brockington.
Yes.
Councillor King.
No.
Councillor Hubley.
Yes.
Councillor Deans. Councillor Dudas.
Yes.
Mayor Watson.
Yes.
15 yeas, 6 nays.
Councillor Leeper, your motion is now moot because of the passage of that motion. Motions requiring suspension of the rules of procedure. Are there any others requiring suspension? No. Notice is a motion for consideration at subsequent meeting. Avis de motion par examen à réunion subséquente. Councillor Suds, please. Seconded by Councillor Gower. If you'd like to read your motion.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't go into all of their whereas as it is a notice of motion, but just to give you some context and therefore be resolved. Given the report that we received today from the Integrity Commissioner, and in light of the brave women who came forward and shared their experiences with our colleague these women who showed tremendous courage in their actions and inspired many others to stand with them. Now that we have the Integrity Commissioner's report and has found that Councillor Shirelli has contravened Section 4 and Section 7 of the Code of Conduct and has recommended to Council the suspension of the remuneration paid for 90 days for each complaint, amounting to 270 days. There's more details, more whereases, but I'll move to the therefore be resolved, asking that the city's chief financial officer be directed to invest the total remuneration being withheld from this member of council due to the contraventions of Section 4 and Section 7 of the Code of Conduct to be allocated to community organizations that support survivors of domestic violence and or sexual assault. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Councillor. The next notice of motion is by Councillor McKenney and seconded by Councillor Menard, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is notice of motion for our next council meeting. It is regarding changes to policing and police budget process in Ottawa. Whereas our city, province, and nation are currently dealing with continued instances of anti-Black racism and systemic racism in our society, including in our police services. And whereas many in our community have strongly advocated for the Ottawa Police Services budget to be reconsidered and reinvested into community health and interventionist programming, and whereas many in our community have called for the reallocation of funds toward frontline, unarmed mental health citizen response teams for de-escalation, whereas if Ottawa City Council had the authority to directly impact the Ottawa Police Services budget, it could adequately address community concerns and create solutions. And whereas if Ottawa City Council had the authority to impact the Ottawa Police Services budget, this would ensure greater transparency and strengthen public trust by making debate and efforts more publicly informed and scrutinized. And whereas this enhanced budgetary role would allow the police board to continue to serve its purpose, with the only meaningful difference being that council would be the highest and final decision-making body, as is already the case for other committees and boards. And whereas other municipalities across the country have also passed motions that seek to change their police services in response to growing calls for police reform, therefore be it resolved that City Council direct the City Manager in consultation with the Ottawa Police Services Board and Community Protective Services to develop alternative models of community safety response that would A, involve the creation of non-police-led response to calls which do not involve weapons or violence, such as those involving individuals experiencing mental health crises, and where a police response is not necessary. B, reflect the city's commitment to reconciliation. C, involve extensive community consultation on the proposed response model. And D, detail the likely reductions to the Ottawa Police Services budget that would result from these changes. And be it further resolved that City Council requests the Province of Ontario to amend the Police Services Act 1990 to allow for Ottawa City Council to have control over the Ottawa Police Services budget by creating a clause in Section 39 that exempts the City of Ottawa from the following restriction. A, 39.4, in establishing an overall budget for the board, the Council does not have the authority to approve or disapprove specific items in the estimates. And be it further resolved that City Council requests the Government of Ontario to eliminate all appeal powers to the Ottawa Police Services Board as set out in the Police Services Act 1990 for the Ontario Civilian Police Commission to overturn Ottawa City Council decisions pertaining to police budget matters, including requests for reduction, abolition, creation, or amalgamation of police services. And be it further resolved that City Council requests the Ottawa Police Services Board to post its use of force policy on its public website, and be it further resolved that City Council requests the province immediately review and redo the Equipment and Use of Force Regulation, RRO 1990, Reg 926, so as to incorporate further modifications based on alternative models and best practices in peer jurisdictions which address the use of deadly force, including de-escalation. And be it further resolved that City Council requests the Ottawa Police Services Board to promptly adopt the recommendations from the Ontario Human Rights Commission on race-based data and report on the implementation status by January 1st, 2021. And be it further resolved that City Council requests that the province immediately reinstate the Police Services Act reforms recommended by Justice Tulloch, namely reforms surrounding the independence and requirements for the Special Investigations Unit, recommendation 5.7. And be it further resolved that City Council requests the Ottawa Police Services Board to ensure policies are enacted requiring all instances of alleged racial profiling and bias to be investigated under the Police Services Act.
Okay, thank you. We'll deal with that at our next meeting. Any other notices of motion for consideration of subsequent meeting? Motion to introduce bylaws. Councillor Dudas, please, seconded by Councillor El-Shantiri.
The bylaws listed on the agenda under motion to introduce bylaws through readings be read and passed.
Carried.
Carried.
Confirmation bylaw. Councillor Dudas and El-Shantiri.
That the following bylaw be read and passed to confirm the proceedings of the council meeting of July 15th, 2020.
Carried.
Carried.
Inquiries, just a reminder to members of the media availability with Dr. Etchis and other city officials and myself and Councillor Eglai will take place in about 10 minutes after the end of this meeting. We have one written inquiry from Councillor Menard, please.
Thank you very much. Given the ongoing issues that have plagued the P3 Confederation line, I'm requesting that staff provide to Council and Transit Commission no later than August 1st, 2020, a comprehensive list of outstanding problems with Line 1, including issues with infrastructure, track, tunnel, stations, etc., and vehicles, and the expected remediation date of those issues. Further, I'm asking that staff provide regular updates to Council and Transit Commission as items are completed or added, and that's on behalf of myself and Commissioner Gilbert.
Yeah, you can't, it has to be another member of council, not a commissioner. So it's just from you, Councillor Menard. So I want to wish everyone a very safe and happy summer. I know a number of members of council will try to take a week or so off, and well-deserved. So enjoy and stay safe. Councillor Dudas, adjournment, please.
Best motion of the day. That the proceedings of the City Council meeting of July 15th, 2020 be adjourned.
Carried? Carried. Thank you.